Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Roxanna Vargas. Roxanna Vargas was born on September 11, 1988. Venezuela, she grew up in a warm and loving family, with her older sister Mariana and parents Antonio and Ana Teresa. At 17, she graduated from the school at the dawn of the ball and received a scholarship from the Gran Mar Riscal Foundation to study social communications at the Catholic University of Santa Rosa in Caracas. So she and Mariana moved to the capital to live with their grandmother, who already lived there. Their parents frequently traveled to Caracas to visit them, cherishing the time spent together. By 2008, Roxanna was in her 8th semester at the Faculty of Social Communications. She was also involved in the production of the well-known program Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. One of the last messages on her phone was sent on July 12, 2008. Said she was on her way to meet a friend at Plaza Venezuela at the time. She was in the Chacom area, but then she disappeared. Initially, detectives suspected that she might have been a victim of a robbery or kidnapping. This suspicion comes from the quick kidnappings, where criminals would abduct victims for a few hours to demand a ransom, releasing them afterward. Unfortunately, many of these incidents ended tragically, with some victims being killed if their families could not pay the ransom. Investigators have ruled out a kidnapping. As Roxanna's family has not received a ransom demand, they then considered the possibility of a robbery, but there was no evidence to support this theory either. On July 14, 2008, the body of a girl was discovered by a security guard working at the Biosa Airline building, now known as Conviasa. Located in the Kaiser Park area of Caracas, the guard heard loud barking from dogs near a vacant lot close to his workplace and decided to investigate. Upon approaching the lot, he found the lifeless body of a girl lying amidst a pile of construction debris. Shocked by the discovery, he immediately contacted a criminal investigation agency. Detectives arrived at the scene and determined that the body was buried under rubble, stones, wooden boards, and other waste. Forensic experts conducted an initial examination and concluded that the girl had been dead for approximately 36 to 48 hours. Her face was disfigured, and one of her eyes was dislodged from its socket. The body showed multiple injuries and bruises, but the primary cause of death was determined to be a skull fracture, caused by several blows to the head with a blunt object. The girl was wearing a triangular earring in her left ear, but the matching earring from her right ear was missing. The police quickly identified the victim. On July 13, the day before the body was found, a woman named Anna had reported the disappearance of her 19-year-old daughter, Roxanna. Roxanna's physical description matched the body, and DNA testing later confirmed her identity. In a conversation with Roxanna's mother, Anna, she admitted that she suspected one person. The person she referred to was psychiatrist Edmundo Chirinos. At the time, Edmundo was 73 years old and was a well-known psychiatrist. Highly educated, he earned his surgical diploma in 1958 and graduated as a psychologist in 1960 from the Central University of Venezuela. Additionally, he obtained master's degrees in neuroscience and clinical psychology from prestigious institutions, including Oxford and Cambridge in England, the University of Marseille in France, and Quincy University in New York. By 1961, Edmundo founded the School of Psychology at the Central University of Venezuela, and in 1984, he was elected as the university's rector. He has a varied professional background, and he is also actively involved in politics. In 1988, he ran for president as a candidate of the Independent Moral Movement. By 1999, He was a member of the National Constituent Assembly. Due to his impressive academic qualifications, he served as a personal therapist for Presidents Jaime Lucinchi, Rafael Caldera, and Hugo Chavez. He also established a psychiatric clinic called Clin Uesi in La Florida, Caracas. Ana shared with detectives the reasons she suspected Edmundo of killing her daughter. Roxanna, she revealed that Roxanna used to date him. She also mentioned that Roxanna had been a patient of his, seeking help for postpartum depression after Roxanna was diagnosed with depression on October 2, 2007. The family decided to consult a trusted doctor, Edmundo. At that time, Roxanna was already struggling with eating disorders. Roxanna had long been concerned about her weight, and these thoughts became increasingly distressing for her. Ana said that during her first consultation with Dr. Edmundo, Roxanna was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a decision her family felt was made too quickly. Nevertheless, they decided to follow Edmundo's advice when he suggested that Roxanna try a method that would increase her sleep time. He believed that this method could solve her problem. The sleep therapy he proposed involved taking small doses of sedatives and sleeping pills over a period of time. When Roxanna met Edmundo again for further consultation, he began asking her strange questions, including whether she had a boyfriend. She replied that she did, but this was not true. She had feelings for a young man named Mariana, who did not return her affection. Mariana was also her sister's classmate, and at that time, she only had a friendly relationship with him. Edmundo then inquired if she had been intimate with her boyfriend, to which she truthfully answered no, as she was still a virgin. During their first meeting, Edmundo attempted to get physically closer to Roxanna, which felt inappropriate to others, however. She began to notice that his desire for physical closeness with her was becoming more apparent. After one of Roxanna's consultations, she asked her mother to take her to the pharmacy to buy sanitary pads because she had unexpectedly started her period. Roxanna's mother, Ana, was aware of her daughter's menstrual cycle and knew that this period was not due yet, although this was unusual. Ana remained calm. One day, while Roxanna was in another sleep therapy session with Edmundo, Ana waited in the waiting room and met another mother named Luisa, who was also there for her daughter's sleep therapy. They exchanged phone numbers, and during their conversation, Luisa revealed that her daughter had also started her period right after a session. Both speculated that these occurrences might be side effects of the sedatives and psychotropic medications their daughters were taking. On October 15, 2007, Roxanna had her last consultation with Dr. Edmundo near the end of the session. She woke up when the sleeping pills she had taken stopped being effective. The first thing she noticed was a bright light shining in her eyes. Then, she felt Edmundo touch her lips and kiss her. In a matter of moments, he removed her underwear and began to assault her. She was in shock and tried to escape. But he quickly stopped her, hugged her, and said that sedatives can sometimes cause hallucinations. When she left the clinic, Roxanna went to meet her mother, Ana, and together, they walked to the shopping mall. There, they met her best friend Valentina, seizing the opportunity when her mother was not listening. She told Valentina about what had happened in the clinic. Valentina was so disturbed by Roxanna's story that when Roxanna went to the restroom, she spoke to Ana about her concerns. When Roxanna returned, Ana immediately confronted her, asking what had occurred at Edmundo's office. She recounted the events, though her memory was hazy due to the sedative. After hearing the details, Ana took Roxanna to a gynecologist, and the doctor confirmed what Roxanna had said. She had always been honest with her mother, so Ana believed that her daughter was not at fault. Roxanna's horrifying revelation, coupled with a medical examination, shows that Edmundo took advantage of her. Ana considered suing Edmundo for violence against her daughter, Roxanna, but later she felt worried about this decision. She doubted anyone would believe her, because Edmundo was a famous and prestigious doctor with many connections in the political world. She worries about the consequences both she and her daughter will face if she files a complaint. After leaving the gynecology clinic, Anna takes Roxanna back to Bay del Pasco for a psychological consultation with Dr. Abel. As they are concerned about her mental health, the girl was experiencing insomnia and nervous breakdowns, and she frequently expressed a desire to see Dr. Edmundo. Abel diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder and eating problems, which made her feel anxious and stressed. She underwent treatment with Abel until mid-December 2007, during which she showed significant improvement. As a result, Abel recommended that she return to Caracas to continue her studies. He also advised avoiding any meetings with Edmundo. Anna found a female psychiatrist, Audrey Roussin, at the Scarakis Treatment Center in Caracas now. Roxana could continue regular psychiatric consultations to maintain her mental health, which was a relief for Anna, however. As soon as Roxana returned to Caracas, she started an intimate relationship with Edmundo. This time, their interactions were not about consultations or treatment sessions. In her blog, she described their first encounter and mentioned that their relationship was without commitments. As Edmundo was much older than her, she also shared her feelings for him. However, she felt worried because in his eyes, she was just an object to satisfy his sexual desires. She became more and more emotionally dependent on him over time. Her family and friends realized that this relationship was still going on, and they tried everything to convince her to change her mind. They wanted to force her to break up, but she refused. Roxana trusted her mother and sister completely because they knew her very well. They noticed a sudden change in her mood. Initially, she hoped that Edmundo would develop feelings for her, but as time went on, her hopes faded. By May 2008, she was fed up because she no longer wanted to be the object for him to satisfy his sexual desires. She threatened him that if he did not change, she would make their relationship public. She also planned to gather evidence of his mistreatment of other patients. She warned him that if the incident was exposed, his career would be over, as no one would want to see him for medical treatment anymore. Edmundo understood Roxana better than ever. He was aware that she had once participated in a popular television program, giving her a platform to share her story with the media. Additionally, the TV channel that aired the program was owned by someone who had previously clashed with he, making the fallout even more serious. It became clear to he that if she went public, it could lead to a nationwide scandal. On July 12, 2008, around 2 p.m., Roxana met with Mariana, a young man she had previously loved. In the Chacao area, he was supposed to help her write a script. The meeting took place at a shopping mall around 6 p.m. However, the meeting was interrupted when Edmundo kept calling to harass Roxana. She felt forced to cancel her date with Mariana, saying she needed to see her best friend. Irma, however, Mariana, who knew Roxana well, quickly realized she was actually going to see Edmundo. In fact, Mariana, Roxana and her sister were all close friends and knew about her relationship with Edmundo. He had told her many times that he did not approve of the relationship, but his words had no effect. She often had to come up with excuses to hide from her friends and family whenever she went on a date with Edmundo because she did not want to be criticized. Ultimately, Mariana had no choice but to put her in a taxi, knowing she was indeed heading to meet Edmundo. Earlier that evening, she had planned to meet Irma, but she eventually texts Irma to say she's going to meet someone Irma also knows. Referring to Edmundo, Irma understood immediately. When Irma called, she around 7:40 p.m., but only received a brief answer. After that call, no one heard from Roxana again. When the police began investigating the case, Edmundo tried to defend himself and gave interviews about Roxana's disappearance. During the interview, he confirmed that she had come to the clinic that day, but had only stayed for a few minutes. On July 21, 2008, Edmundo was called to the prosecutor's office to testify as a witness, but failed to appear. Consequently, the detectives assigned to the case searched his belongings, starting with his office at the La Florida clinic. There, they discovered a triangular earring, which matched the one found on Roxanna's body. They also found blood stains in the office and collected samples for DNA analysis using luminol. Forensic experts found large blood stains on the sofa, which appeared to have been meticulously cleaned. Along with hair, DNA testing confirmed that both the blood and hair belonged to Roxanna. At that time, Edmundo lived in a penthouse in the Cebucan neighborhood of Caracas. However, it wasn't long before the police arrived at his residence. What they discovered among his personal belongings shocked them. They found 1.2 photographs of women, some naked, others in their underwear. Most of these photos were taken at his clinic, and the women appear to be under the influence of psychotropic drugs. Among the photographs were also images of Roxanna. This evidence implicated Edmundo in Roxanna's death. Despite this, he denied all accusations from the start. On August 1, 2008, Edmundo was arrested and charged with the attempted murder of Roxanna. During the initial hearing, the court ordered that he remain under house arrest while the investigation continued. He was also prohibited from leaving the country, and his medical license was suspended. However, despite these bans, he continued to quietly provide psychological counseling services at home for 2 years. Until the trial began, it was not until the trial that he was permanently stripped of his medical license. Edmundo's trial officially began on March 16, 2010. The prosecution presented its case based on evidence gathered during the investigation. According to them, on July 12, 2008, Edmundo asked Roxanna to come to his office. Shortly after 7:00 p.m., she went to his clinic in La Florida, where he struck her repeatedly in the head with a blunt object. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered at least 7 skull fractures. Additionally, the amount of drugs in her system far exceeded the recommended therapeutic dose. It was also discovered that she had been taking antidepressants during the trial. The prosecution has established that Roxanna, due to her psychological condition, was emotionally unstable and easily manipulated. Edmundo, being medically trained, was fully aware of this and exploited his expertise to manipulate and intimidate her. 15 women testified during the trial, all alleging that Edmundo had subjected them to abuse during sleep therapy sessions. The court verified their claims. Edmundo's defense team argued that Roxanna's visit to his office that day was very brief, suggesting he had no involvement in her murder. They attempted to shift the blame to someone else, asserting that he had no connection to the crime. However, despite these efforts to distort the facts, the evidence presented to the court was overwhelming. In September 2010, the court sentenced Edmundo Chirinos to 20 years in prison to be served in the state of Miranda. At that time, the maximum sentence for similar cases was 30 years. While in prison, Edmundo underwent surgery in the intensive care unit. Afterward, it was claimed that he could neither speak nor walk and began using a wheelchair less than 2 years later. In March 2012, he was released from prison to serve the rest of his sentence at home. This news spread across various media outlets, and what drew attention was that, upon his release, he was speaking perfectly normally. This sparked public outrage. As many saw it as an injustice, it appeared that arrangements had been made to allow him to return home. It became evident that the surgery had not resulted in the severe complications that were initially reported, leading to speculation about the true reasons for his release. On August 24, 2013, Edmundo passed away at his home from natural causes. The story of Roxanna and Edmundo remains etched in the minds of many Venezuelans and is considered one of the most shocking cases in the country's history. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Whitney Hikel. On October 19, 2012, police discovered the body of 21-year-old Whitney Hikel. Her body was found about 40 minutes from her home in Gresham, Oregon, near a fire. Whitney had been missing since October 16. The last person to see her alive was her husband Clint Hikel, who saw her leave their apartment at 6:45 a.m. She kissed him goodbye and rushed to work for her 7 a.m. shift at a local Starbucks, but she never arrived for work. Clint became worried when he called Whitney's workplace to check on Whitney and see if she was okay. Her co-workers said that she hadn't come to work today, possibly because she was sick and decided to stay home. But Clint dismissed this idea. In the morning, Whitney felt fine and had come to work early in the morning. It was unusual for her not to be at work at this hour. She had never been late or missed a day before. And Clint also said that he couldn't reach her by phone. Sensing that something was wrong, he contacted the police around 10 a.m. that same morning. On the same day, police discovered that the Whitney's bank card had been used at a nearby gas station just hours after she went missing. Additionally, her black 1999 Ford Explorer was seen in the Walmart parking lot. What could have happened to her? Whitney was a hardworking, kind, and beautiful woman who was very religious and regularly attended her local church. She had strong relationships with her co-workers, family, friends, and neighbors. At the time she disappeared, she had been married to Clint for 9 months. They were a happy couple, and those close to them believed they had an ideal relationship. Whitney grew up with 6 siblings. Among her siblings, she was known for her determination and kindness. Clint appeared to be a very devoted husband. Friends and family found it hard to believe that someone so caring could harm Whitney. Many people in the community supported Clint, dismissing any accusations against him. The case sparked significant public interest. During a local media interview, Clint smiled while discussing his wife's disappearance, which raised suspicions among police. However, many interpreted this smile as a sign of nervousness. The police conducted a thorough investigation into Clint, but he had a solid alibi. He left the house shortly after his wife did. New information has surfaced indicating that Whitney's car was spotted near a Walmart on the outskirts of Gresham. Witnesses reported that a man was driving the car while Whitney was in the passenger seat. However, the witness could not provide a description of the driver or the condition of Whitney. Whitney's car was later found in the store's parking lot, with broken glass on the front passenger door. Signs of a struggle and blood were also discovered, and samples were sent to the lab for analysis. Unfortunately, the store's video surveillance cameras were positioned too far away to identify who was in the car. The only information obtained from the footage was that the car was left in the parking lot at 11 a.m. Efforts to locate additional witnesses who might have seen the car were unsuccessful. The police discovered information about a man in Whitney's car and started investigating who she might have been with. Whitney's family denied that she had a boyfriend. Her brothers were at work during that time, and none of her friends were with her in the car that morning. A search for Whitney was actively conducted in the area where she went missing, as well as in nearby forests and bodies of water. Unfortunately, her phone could not be tracked because it was likely turned off the day after her disappearance. On October 17, 2012, an important piece of evidence was found in the bushes near a service station, not far from the Walmart where her car was seen. A child discovered Whitney's mobile phone and gave it to some adults. When the police learned about this, they checked the phone and found it had been turned off the entire time, preventing them from tracking its location. The phone had dozens of missed calls and messages from her worried husband, along with calls from colleagues and other relatives. By this point, police were convinced that something terrible had happened to Whitney. Everyone who knew Whitney hoped she was safe, but police lost hope when they discovered blood in her car. Neighbors and church members joined in the search for her. Multiple search parties were quickly organized to comb the areas near Whitney's last known location. Meanwhile, police are reviewing the details of the incident and the information they have at the time. The recording did not provide any clues to identify the kidnapper, and there was no clear image of him on the surveillance camera. It appears that Whitney attempted to use her phone to call for help, but the attacker noticed and took the phone, possibly throwing it into the bushes where it was later found. Alternatively, he may have forced Whitney to throw it away in front of him, especially if he threatened her with a weapon. Additionally, the kidnapper did not contact anyone or demand ransom, suggesting that this was not a typical kidnapping for money. As time passed without Whitney being found, it is likely that she was murdered. The police started questioning residents of the apartment complex, including the Whitney's neighbors. Some residents were unaware that the Whitney was missing, while others expressed hope that she was safe and would return soon. Initially, nothing suspicious was discovered until the police spoke with one of the neighbors, Jonathan Holt. He had a close relationship with Clint and Whitney. In fact, Whitney's family gave Jonathan a key to their apartment so he could take care of their cats and plants while they were away. Just 2 weeks before Whitney went missing, Clint helped Jonathan start his motorcycle. Jonathan was involved in the search for Whitney after she went missing and offered support to her worried husband. As the police questioned Jonathan, he became increasingly nervous, leading to incoherent and confusing responses. The contradictions in his statements highlighted that he was inventing alibis on the spot. Initially, he claimed that he had been robbed that morning, but this turned out to be entirely false. When police inquired why he hadn't reported the robbery to the police, they found that his second alibi was also untrue. Police concluded that he had not been at work that day. Those who knew Jonathan, including Whitney's family, described him as a calm and friendly young man who had never caused any trouble. He was happily married, and police found no evidence of substance abuse or criminal behavior in his past. Jonathan was a good student, graduating from high school in 2006. 4 years later, he proposed to his girlfriend and she said yes. The couple initially lived in a nearby apartment complex before moving next door to Whitney's family just months before Whitney went missing. Jonathan recounted the events of that fateful morning. On the morning of October 16th, Whitney found Jonathan waiting for her outside her apartment. He had asked for a ride to work, and because they were close and trusted each other, she felt safe and agreed. Whitney was always willing to help others. They got into her car, and she started driving. About 5 minutes into the drive, Jonathan pulled out a 9mm pistol and pointed it at her, demanding that she take him to a secluded area near Lake Roslyn. Terrified, Whitney complied and stopped at the specified location. There, Jonathan attacked and raped her at gunpoint. The police later discovered the firearm nearby. After the attack, Jonathan feared that she would report him to the police, so he shot Whitney to avoid arrest. Jonathan threw away the gun, placed Whitney's body in the trunk of his car, and drove to a remote wooded area. He buried Whitney in the bushes and then drove to a Walmart parking lot. There, he parked his car in a secluded area, away from surveillance cameras. Subsequent investigation revealed that the blood found in the car was Whitney's. He then returned home, discarded his bloody clothes, and showered to remove any traces of gunpowder from his hands and the blood. According to police, the window had been intentionally broken to throw the investigation off track. The autopsy revealed that Jonathan had made no effort to conceal his evidence in the car. Several pieces of physical evidence were recovered, including DNA from both Whitney and Jonathan. Whitney was discovered on October 19th after the killer reported the crime and revealed the location. Her body showed signs of severe mutilation and gunshot wounds from close range. Additionally, there were indications of decomposition, which made the forensic investigation more challenging. The police had Jonathan's confession, strong DNA evidence linking him and the victim found in Whitney's car, Jonathan's fingerprints on the gun that shot Whitney, and his DNA on her body after the attack. All of this confirmed Jonathan's testimony. Whitney's husband Clint was devastated after his wife's death. He found it hard to believe that Jonathan, a family friend and neighbor, could commit such a terrible act against his wife. The police gathered sufficient evidence to charge Jonathan Holt with first-degree murder. He had already been arrested and was cooperative throughout the investigation, providing the police with all the necessary information. It appeared that he genuinely regretted his actions and felt a deep sense of guilt. An autopsy of Whitney's body confirmed that she died from gunshot wounds, with the Jonathan shooting her 4 times in the head. Experts stated that she died instantly. In court, a recording of the Jonathan's testimony was presented along with all the evidence against him. The lawyer argued that the Jonathan showed remorse for his actions and had confessed to the crime, which should warrant a lighter sentence. Jonathan expressed his sorrow to his family and friends for the loss of they. He explained his behavior as being because he had a secret crush on Whitney. Even though he was married, every time he met Whitney, he felt intense emotions, but she remained cold and indifferent. He eventually lost control when she rejected him. During the trial, Jonathan spoke about his actions. In front of everyone present, Jonathan admitted to first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of Whitney. During the court proceedings, the Jonathan mostly kept his head down, appearing guilty. He began to cry when the relatives of the Whitney shared how his actions impacted their lives, but he cried the hardest when her husband Clint spoke. He tried to look at Clint 3 times, but each time he quickly looked down. On July 8, 2013, Jonathan Holt was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The weekend following the trial, he was transferred to the Hammer County Detention Center in Noma County. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of affair Elodie Kulik. At around midnight on January 11, 2002, the French Rescue Service received a heartbreaking call. A woman, her voice panicked, screamed that she had been kidnapped. Other voices could be heard in the background before the noise increased, and the attackers took over the phone, cutting off the call forever. The call left the rescue service extremely worried, but the operators were unable to gather any useful information. Attempts to call the number back were unsuccessful as it was either out of coverage or switched off. The situation led to an investigation into one of the most unusual crimes the police had ever encountered. They had no information, not even the name of the caller. The only option was to investigate the mobile phone number, but at the time, the technology could not accurately track the caller's location, so the technology was of no help. In the early morning hours of January 11, 2002, at around 7 a.m., a random driver in the rural area of Bacardi made a disturbing discovery. He noticed a car that appeared to have been abandoned in a ditch, with damage to the vehicle and the passenger door open. Concerned that the car had been stolen and abandoned, he called the police. When asked if anyone else was nearby, he replied that there was no one around. After making the call, he continued on his way. Since it was a remote area, it took some time for the police to arrive, and they arrived at the scene around 8 a.m. A Peugeot 106 was found upside down in a ditch, which seemed unusual as there was a clear and safe stretch of highway nearby, making it unlikely that it had ended up there by accident. There were no signs of braking or skidding on the road, suggesting the car had intentionally left the sidewalk at a high rate of speed. The keys were still in the ignition, but there was no sign of the driver or any passengers. Police used the license plate to identify the owner. Affair Elodie Kulik, a 24-year-old bank employee who lived nearby. While investigating the abandoned car, her bag was discovered inside, raising concerns for police. The bag contained her money, cards, and keys, but she had disappeared without a trace. Police went to the bank where the affair worked. Bank employees told them she had not shown up for work that day. They then contacted the local hospital, but there were no reports of any victims matching Affair's description. That morning, Affair's father contacted the police to report her absence. He explained that he had tried calling her cell phone, but she did not answer and did not make contact, which was very unusual for her. Normally, if she had any problems, she would always notify her family if she would be late or unable to come home. However, this time, she did not respond and it appeared that she had disappeared. Police began searching the area where her car was found and decided to release a photo to raise public awareness of her disappearance. On the morning of Saturday, January 12, 2002, a worker from a nearby farm went to a landfill 12 kilometers from the station. In the distance, he saw what he initially thought was a tree trunk. However, as he got closer, he was horrified to discover the disfigured body of a woman. He quickly called the police to report his horrific discovery. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrifying sight, the partially burned and disfigured body of a young woman, showing clear signs of a violent death. Tests are needed to confirm the identity of the body. The body was discovered nearly 6 kilometers away from where her car was found the previous day, which was unusual. Police noted that this area is not frequented by many visitors. It is isolated and not a tourist destination. This suggests that the suspect is likely a local resident. The crime scene was secured and thoroughly searched for evidence. The gendarme discovered a fresh cigarette, but that may have been discarded by the potential killer. Additionally, a condom containing male fluid was located next to the body. Police focused on finding tire tread marks from any vehicle that might have brought the affair to this location, but they were unsuccessful in locating any. All collected evidence was sent to forensic scientists for analysis. On January 12, the police contacted Affair's parents to inform them of the sad news. When the family learned of the incident, the parents were devastated by their daughter's death. Overwhelmed with grief, the mother attempted to end her life. She survived but fell into a coma, remaining in that state for years until her death in 2011. The desperate father was determined to find his daughter's killer. Affair was a highly intelligent and educated young woman. She studied law in northern France and later returned to her hometown of Péronne. At just 23, she was offered a position at a bank, where she excelled and quickly became the youngest director in the bank's history. She took great pride in her career accomplishments. In addition to her career success, Affair was also very beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes. The forensic examination of Affair's car determined that it was traveling at a low speed. There were no signs of collision with another vehicle, raising the possibility that someone inside the car might have deliberately driven it into the ditch. When police checked Affair's mobile phone, they found a call to the local rescue service shortly after midnight. The call ended suddenly after she managed to scream. Police retrieved a 26-second recording filled with noise and unidentified male voices. While this recording did not provide clear evidence, it was notable because it indicated male involvement during the incident. The autopsy results showed that Affair died painfully from strangulation, and DNA evidence indicated that she had been raped. However, this DNA did not match any profiles in the database, suggesting her attacker had no prior criminal history. Police believed that the suspect's careless handling of the DNA would eventually lead him to reveal himself again. However, this assumption raised concerns, as it could result in another victim, so they could not afford to wait. Police organized street patrols and collected DNA samples from all male acquaintances of the affair. If these efforts did not lead to results, the search would expand to the surrounding area near the crime scene. The instincts of the gendarmes proved correct. Just 10 days after finding Affair's body, a police commissioner from another precinct arrested a man named Kirill, who had a history of sexual violence. He was in the area on the night of the disappearance and later attacked another woman, who reported the incident. While Kirill admitted to harassing this woman, claiming it was just harmless flirting, he denied any involvement in Affair's murder. The investigation of Kirill involved checking his car, which had scratches containing gray paint. This paint matched the color of the Peugeot 106 driven by Affair. DNA samples were taken from Kirill for comparison. However, the analysis showed that the paint did not match Affair's car, and Kirill's DNA did not match any evidence from the crime scene. As a result, Kirill was released, and further inquiries into Affair's acquaintances did not produce any new leads. The case has no prime suspect and no new leads. It seems the investigation has reached a dead end. Meanwhile, Affair's grieving father Jackie remains closely involved in the investigation and begins his own investigations. In order to quickly find the culprit, he ensures that the case is widely reported in the media, hoping that this will lead to new leads. On April 15, 2002, 3 months after Affair's body was discovered, new clues emerged in the case. The police received a detailed report from audio experts who had analyzed the recording of Affair's last call to emergency services. The experts carefully filtered out the background noise and identified 2 distinct male voices among the cries for help. One voice was calm and tried to reassure the victim, while the other, more aggressive, argued that she needed to be killed. They noted that the attackers had a heavy accent typical of an area called Picard, which happened to be close to where Affair's body was found. However, this information did not make the police's task any easier. They still lacked data and the search for a new suspect was slow, with the assumption that 2 men were involved. After 6 months of unproductive investigation, the police department received a call from a farmer in Turtree. On July 8, 2002, he reported discovering a young girl's body on a haystack while heading to work. The shocking scene also revealed another mutilated body. Forensic experts, horrified by the brutality, noted that her limbs were dislocated and her body showed signs of having been run over by a vehicle. This location was only 30 kilometers away from where Affair had previously been found. The victim was identified as Patricia, a clerk who was known for riding her bicycle. She had gone missing just days before the farmer's discovery. Notably, similar items were found at this crime scene. Patricia was recognized as a beautiful girl who worked in a restaurant in Alberta. It was clear to police that these cases were linked, as such violent incidents had never occurred in this previously peaceful area. Witnesses who saw Patricia shortly before her death reported that a black sedan was following her bicycle on the street. At the time, they did not think much of it. Unfortunately, this was all the information the police could gather. The witnesses could not remember the car's make, model, or license plate. However, the police believed this crime was connected to a previous case, and new information about the black sedan helped narrow down the search. The media quickly picked up the story, increasing public fear and spreading rumors about a possible serial killer. The police's struggle to solve the case led to the discovery of a 3rd body on August 21, 2002. In Villa Brentoni, a van was found abandoned near the railroad tracks. And inside it, police discovered a 3rd young girl who had been wounded by a bladed weapon and died from internal bleeding. Unlike the earlier victims, this girl's identity was unknown because no one had reported her missing. The police spoke with local residents and learned about the parents of a daughter who had not returned home the night before. They thought she was out with friends. Upon investigation, they recognized the victim as their 18-year-old daughter, Crestel. She was killed approximately 40 kilometers from where the first victim was found. In just 7 months, the gendarmes encountered 3 similar murders of young girls, each caught by the criminals at night on roads between settlements. The locations of these crimes on the map created a triangle that the media called the Triangle of Death. This situation caused public anxiety to escalate, leading residents to hold a memorial procession to express their fear for safety. Even with more police patrols and checkpoints, attempts to gather new evidence and testimonies from other potential victims were unsuccessful. However, by the end of November 2002, the investigation into the second Patricia victim's murder produced new leads. DNA found on the victim's clothing identified a suspect named Jean-Paul Conti, marking an important breakthrough for the police. Police arrived to question Conti, a man who had served 17 years in prison for a series of rapes. When he saw the police, he was very surprised. He remained calm and did not attract the attention of those around him. His home was located in a triangle of death, which included the locations where the 3 victims were found. Conti was arrested in the early morning of November 25th, but police needed more evidence to link him to the murders. His DNA was only found on the clothing of the second victim, and there were no traces on the first and third victims. The investigation later determined that he was only involved in the murders of the second and third victims, resulting in a life sentence. In addition, it was confirmed that he could not have been involved in the murder of Affair, as he was in prison at the time. This indicates that the cases of Affair and the other victims are unrelated, revealing that there are at least 2 killers operating in the area, targeting young girls. The investigation resumed with meticulous efforts to identify all mobile devices that may have been in the vicinity where the body and a gray Peugeot 106 were discovered. A total of 14,000 signals were recorded and needed analysis. Specialists undertook a massive task that included reviewing over 600 sent messages, listening to more than 10,000 conversations, collecting 5,500 DNA samples from found mobile phones, and conducting thousands of interviews. Police examined over 500 theories related to the crime, but none provided any leads. The department received numerous anonymous letters identifying various individuals as potential killers. Police followed up on these leads, which consumed a lot of resources, but ultimately did not advance the case. After a lengthy period, police offered a reward of €60,000 for information leading to the capture of the real criminal. However, this also failed to yield results, leaving the police at a standstill. 9 years after Affair's body was discovered, a new police officer joined the investigation. He was a young specialist with a fresh perspective and new skills. He suggested a method that focuses on analyzing the DNA found at the crime scene to search for close relatives of the DNA's owner, rather than just the owner themselves. This innovative technique was used for the first time in France in this case and proved to be a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Progress was made in November 2011 when police identified a relative of the killer. Evidence strongly suggested that the killer was part of the Wired family. It was believed that the elderly man was not involved, meaning that the perpetrator was likely his son. The Wired family had lived in the area for nearly 50 years, and their son, Gregory Wired, was a 23-year-old plumber at the time of the murder. To protect the information, police kept his identity a secret for several weeks. However, they were disappointed to discover that Gregory Wired had died in a traffic accident shortly after the Affair murder in November 2003, which was officially ruled a fatal accident. The Gregory's death shortly after Affair's murder explained why his DNA was not found during random sampling of local residents from 2002 to 2010. His profile closely matched the description of the criminal. Gregory, known to his friends as a motorsport racing enthusiast, was cheerful but had a violent streak. He abused alcohol and often lost control when intoxicated, making him prone to aggression. To conduct a DNA examination of the suspect, authorities decided to exhume his body from the cemetery for testing. The results revealed a complete match, identifying one of the killers. The next step for the gendarmerie was to find the owner of the second voice from Affair's last call recording. They began by investigating Gregory's immediate circle. The police aimed not only to piece together the events, but also to ensure that no further threats existed for other young women. While only traces of Gregory were found on the condom at the crime scene, another male voice was clearly captured on the recording. Police then investigated Willie Bardon, a former plumber and bartender who was a close friend of Gregory's. They had many interests in common, and a recording confirmed that it was his voice. Willie lived nearby, and police knew of his past allegations of violence against women, although those incidents did not result in legal action. Witnesses reported that he had chased them in his car. Despite his troubled past, he had no criminal record, which meant that his DNA was not in the police database. He vehemently denied any involvement in the crime and claimed that the police were mistaken. Ultimately, his DNA was not found at the crime scene. In late March 2013, Gregory's ex-girlfriend assisted police in identifying the voices of Gregory and Willie by listening to a recorded phone call. Willie, who had a recognizable accent, was recognized by people who knew him. Despite this evidence, Willie denied any involvement in Affair's death, maintaining his innocence. Some described him as a kind man, a caring husband and father, while others painted a different picture, noting his impulsive behavior, extramarital affairs, alcohol abuse, and repeated advances toward women. Nevertheless, the case against him went to court. The prosecution's case rested largely on the identification of Gregory's girlfriend's voice and several others. Despite the lack of substantial evidence, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution. In 2019, 45-year-old Willie Bardon was convicted of gang rape, kidnapping, and murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. While in custody, he attempted to end his life to prove his innocence. His lawyers quickly filed an appeal, and which was accepted. They argued that the voice on the crucial recording belonged to someone else. Experts analyzed the recording but could not confirm whether it was actually his voice, as it was unclear and discontinuous. This uncertainty raised doubts about the evidence against him. As a result, his conviction was appealed and Willie was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. He was released from prison on September 25, 2020. The story continues. A new trial began, and on July 1, 2021, Willie was convicted again and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His attorney appealed the decision, but the appeal was rejected. The defense team expressed their commitment to doing everything possible to free this innocent man, but he remains in custody. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among 3 siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peta spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with Peta. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and Peta's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and Peta, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and Peta were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, Peta and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. Peta and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. Peta and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and Peta, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, Peta planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, Peta and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, Peta also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after Peta stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. Peta and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of Peta and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely in such case. Kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. Peta's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peta's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peta. Any hope that Peta and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peta family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peta and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peta and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peta were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peta's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peta and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peta's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Bardon, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peta has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peta detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Bardon, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peta alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peta, and Bardon, leading to suspicions that Bardon could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Bardon. She also felt it was essential to find Bardon's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peter. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peter were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Bardon's ship and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peter. Vince explained that their father, Bardon, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peter, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Bardon, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Bardon was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peter, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peter's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Bardon brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Bardon pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Bardon. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Bardon. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Bardon, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peter can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Bardon believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Bardon's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peeta's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peeta on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peeta looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary's fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peeta and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere tension and uncertainty filled the after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peeta and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peta. The next day, he tortured and abused Peta and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of they. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peta but were scared for their own safety. Peta asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Bardon announced Peta and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over Peta and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Bardon, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off Peta and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of Peta and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Bardon disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Bardon was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Bardon's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Bardon died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Bardon learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Bardon as a coward, who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, Peta's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where Peta and Chris were buried. Penny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer Cave was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas, to a family living on a modest farm. Her mother, Sharon, remarried, and her father, Charlie, was a welder. He was a good husband and father, but alcohol turned him into a troublemaker. However, when he was sober, he was calm. Despite the family's ups and downs, they remained close. Sharon worked as an accountant at a chemical plant while raising her family. Jennifer, unlike her outgoing siblings, was quite shy. Jennifer loved reading, which helped her develop her intelligence and memory. Despite her lack of self-confidence, Jennifer was active in school sports and social activities. Her father's abusive drinking habits tore the family apart. After her parents divorced, Jennifer and Clayton lived with their father. They felt great sympathy for him and tried to comfort him. Jennifer wanted her father to stop drinking so much that she ignored the fact that he really didn't want to change. For years after the divorce, in 1999, her mother, Sharon, met a new man named Jim Sedgwick. When Jennifer entered her teens, she changed. She got her braces off, got new glasses, and her appearance became much better. Her personality changed along with her new look. She graduated at the top of her class thanks to her intelligence. Jennifer enrolled in Texas State University as a finance major, but quickly became discouraged and dropped out after her first semester. She then attended community college in Austin and worked part-time at a restaurant in the city to support herself. During this time, she dated Mark, a nice guy from a good family. Their relationship could have led to marriage, but Jennifer became addicted to the nightlife. She partied and drank frequently. Her time spent drinking increased, and along with her marijuana use, her bad habits gradually took over her life. Jennifer's life took a turn when she meets Colton Petoniak. Colton Petoniak was born and raised in Bryant, Arkansas. During his youth, he was known as a smart, attractive boy who was popular with many girls. Colton has a passion for skateboarding and playing the guitar. He attends an all-boys Catholic middle school in Little Rock, where he consistently excels academically and is often named honor roll student. In 2000, Colton was one of 7 seniors and one of 166 statewide finalists for the National Honor Society. During his senior year, he began to have problems with alcohol and violence. This was largely due to his involvement with a wealthy youth group. Colton Petoniak was born and raised in Bryant, Arkansas. During his youth, he was known as a smart, attractive boy who was popular with many girls. However, instead of focusing on his studies, he continued his debauched lifestyle. This led to him losing friends and becoming known for his addiction to alcohol and marijuana. He could have had a bright future if not for these self-destructive habits. After being expelled from his fraternity, he began to engage in illegal drug dealing. His family tried to support him through this, even bringing him back home to live with them. In the spring of 2004, Jennifer and Colton met at a party and immediately connected. Jennifer, always optimistic, decided to give their relationship a try, despite the risks involved. Over time, their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. Jennifer began using drugs with Colton. Colton's luxury apartment became their regular hideout for illegal drug use. Jennifer's addiction became more serious. Her parents tried many times to help her get off drugs, even giving her a car in the hopes that she would come home more often. However, every time Jennifer came home, she failed to keep her promise to quit her addiction. During that time, Colton's condition also gradually worsened. He became paranoid and started carrying weapons to create the image of someone with a criminal record. In 2004, Colton was arrested for illegal drug possession. He later entered rehab. Elsewhere, Jennifer's relationship with her family deteriorated when her parents visited her. They were completely shocked to see that Jennifer had lost a lot of weight. Her image was no longer as healthy as before. Refusing the family's advice to go to a drug treatment center upset Jennifer's parents. Because of that, Sharon and her new husband, Jim, made the decision to stop supporting her financially. They hoped that because of that, she would make more efforts to get her life back. Jennifer did not have enough money to survive on her own, so she was forced to live with Colton. However, after a month of living together, she decided to leave due to some unexpected events. Fortunately, a friend helped her not only by providing a place to stay but also by providing emotional support. After a difficult time, Jennifer's life seemed to be back on track. In early 2005, she began a new relationship with a man named Scott, a nice single father. Scott's lifestyle was the complete opposite of Colton's. Scott worked at a restaurant, sang well, and maintained a healthy lifestyle. When she was with him, Jennifer felt better about herself and looked healthier. She took on the role of a housewife and became the ideal mother figure for his daughter. However, she was still ready to leave at any time if Colton called. On another hand, Colton moved to the Orange Tree apartment complex near the university, where there were parties every weekend. His image changed the views of the people who frequented the place. In addition, there were many healthy things. In the comfortable pace of life, he met Laura Ashley Hall. In contrast to Colton, Laura was infatuated with this man and often showed jealousy towards the other women in the group, especially Jennifer. Laura made a different impression on their friends, who wondered why she was so arrogant and often made fun of anyone. Laura, like Colton, also came from a well-off family. She was an active person, participated in many different activities, and was successful in her studies. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in college but soon dropped out, choosing instead a more comfortable job and lifestyle. Later, Laura and Colton began a romantic relationship. She was also deeply attracted to Colton, like Jennifer. However, Laura's friends noticed that she had changed for the worse, becoming more aggressive, neglecting her work, and not taking care of herself. Many suspected that she had also started using illegal drugs. Beside that, Jennifer entered a new chapter after ending her relationship with Scott. She felt that she did not fit in with his family and did not want to cause trouble. However, she still kept in touch with Colton, who was still deeply in love with her. Regarding their relationship, Jennifer just wanted to keep it as friends. She wanted to get a stable job and go back to college. In August, a new opportunity appeared in her life. She started a new romantic relationship with Michael Rodriguez and found a great job. At a law firm, she impressed everyone after her training and was offered a high-paying consultant position. She was proud of herself and felt truly happy. On August 16th, Jennifer decided to celebrate her new life with her friends. They went to a bar and then to a club. According to a friend, the bouncer at the club refused to let Colton in because of his appearance. This may have led him to turn to drugs. The investigation is still ongoing to shed light on the events that happened that fateful night. The next morning, Jennifer's boyfriend, Michael Rodriguez, checked his phone but found no calls from Jennifer. He recalled that she had promised to call him after dropping Colton off. Michael did not trust Colton's character and lifestyle and was concerned. Around the same time, Jennifer's roommate noticed that she had not come home the night before. The alarm clock was still going off, but no one had turned it off. This worried her roommates as they had a habit of informing each other about their plans. Jennifer's roommate tried to contact her but received no response, which was out of character for her. She was still scheduled to go to work that day, but her work clothes were still hanging on the rack, with no sign that she had put them on and left. This made her roommates even more worried because Jennifer was not the type to leave for work without informing them. The law firm was notified on the morning of August 17th that new employee Jennifer Cave had not arrived for work on time. This was unusual because she had made a good impression during her internship. When a colleague called her at 9 a.m., there was no answer. At 11 a.m., the firm decided to send someone to check Jennifer's home, but there was no answer. The firm contacted Jennifer's mother, Sharon Sedgwick, and discovered that she had also been unable to reach her daughter. The family suspected that Jennifer might have gotten back together with her ex-boyfriend Colton Pataniak, whom they did not like. After more than 12 hours without any news of Jennifer, Sharon reported her daughter missing to the police. The Sedgwicks visited Colton's home, but he refused to meet with them. Jennifer's car was found near Colton's home, making the situation even more suspicious. Although the police searched Jennifer's home and found nothing unusual, they are still investigating based on information from Michael and Sharon, along with the fact that Jennifer's car was found near Colton's home. Sharon and her new husband, Jim, believe that something serious has happened to their daughter. Michael said that Jennifer went out with friends on August 16th to celebrate her new job. One of her friends was her ex-boyfriend, Colton. Jennifer called Michael several times and told him that she wasn't scared but that Colton was acting strangely and that she needed to take him home. However, she did not contact Michael after that. All the clues led investigators to where Colton lived. While the police were still deciding what to do, Sharon and Jim decided to take action themselves. They went to Colton's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. They sensed something was wrong and were about to call a locksmith to open the door. But Jim suddenly discovered an open window and decided to climb in through it. Once inside, he found the apartment in complete disarray. As soon as he entered, Jim was hit by a stench so bad it made him nauseous. He immediately covered his mouth and moved toward the stronger smell. Sure enough, the entire house was empty. And in the bathroom, Jim discovered a gruesome sight, a woman whose head and limbs had been cut off. Nearby, he also found some trash bags and a gym bag. Jim was horrified when he checked inside and discovered the victim's remaining body parts. The freckled legs looked very similar to his stepdaughter's. But the victim's body was so mutilated that it was difficult to identify. Still, Jim hoped the worst would be over for his daughter until the last minute. After calming down a bit, he immediately called an ambulance. Jennifer Cave met a tragic death from being shot in the right arm. The bullet went through her arm, chest, and into her heart, also damaging a major artery. This led to severe blood loss and caused her to die quickly. After that, her body went through incredible and terrifying changes. Forensic experts discovered 18 stab wounds on the victim's body, mainly in the chest and neck. The perpetrator inflicted these wounds after the victim was dead. He then decapitated the victim and shot a bullet through the throat into the head, intending to dismember the victim to easily dispose of the body. The perpetrator severed the victim's upper limbs and placed them in a prepared bag and a garbage bag. The body was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. However, something thwarted his original plan, forcing him to change his course of action. After receiving a search warrant, the police conducted a thorough investigation of the apartment. Police found .38 caliber shell casings in the apartment. The murder weapon was found in Petoniak's car parked in the garage. They also found a large bloody machete in the dishwasher. Toxicology tests showed that the victim had alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in his blood. A road atlas was found at the scene with pages torn out, marking routes in southwest Texas. This suggested that the apartment owner, Colton Petoniak, had fled. Police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest. Investigators conducted interviews with Colton's neighbors to gather information. Nora Sullivan, one of the neighbors, witnessed a suspicious incident at approximately 3 a.m. on August 17th. When she opened the door, she found Colton standing there with blood on his body and a handgun in his waistband. Nora asked him what happened, and Colton said he had gotten into a gunfight with several people. However, Nora did not hear any gunshots that night and suspected he was lying. Investigators also discovered that Colton had contacted Laura twice that night, but did not have specific details about the conversation. On the morning of August 17th, Colton went to a hardware store and purchased items such as a saw, mask, gloves, and cleaning supplies. He used these items to destroy Jennifer's body and planned to clean up the apartment to remove any traces of the crime. However, at that time, the couple Sharon and Jim unexpectedly appeared, possibly scaring Colton into running away, foiling his plan. While investigating Colton's apartment, investigators found a vital clue that led directly to him. He and Laura Hall were spotted in Mexico, where they had crossed the border in her car. Local authorities circulated Colton's photo nationwide during that time. The couple enjoyed their time going to movies and restaurants. They stayed at a hotel in the border town of Piedras Negras, where an employee recognized him as a wanted man. The employee took a photo of him and sent it to the police. Mexican law enforcement arrested the couple and took them to the border, where U.S. officials arrested them. Laura Hall was released from custody pending further investigation. On August 23, 2005, Colton was charged with the felony murder of Jennifer Cave. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. The prosecution presented evidence recovered from Colton's apartment, including a videotape from the store and receipts for the items purchased. Colton claimed he had no memory of the night of the crime due to amnesia caused by excessive alcohol and illegal drug use. He did not initially deny harming Jennifer, but insisted he had no memory. He claimed that he woke up to find his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom later that day. After discovering the body, he contacted Laura, who advised him to purchase a saw and cleaning supplies. She helped Colton dismember the victim and hide the parts in bags. The prosecution argued that Laura was responsible for Jennifer's injuries after her death. Colton later suggested that Laura may have been motivated by jealousy and implied that she was involved in the act of revenge. However, both defendants pleaded not guilty. But the evidence of Colton's responsibility was overwhelming. Jennifer's body was discovered in Colton's apartment. His fingerprints and DNA were found on items such as knives, saws, and guns collected at the crime scene. Colton's car also contained weapons related to the crime. He also purchased cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt about Colton's guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton was sentenced to 55 years in prison, but could be eligible for parole after serving at least half of his sentence. This means Colton won't be released until 2060 at the earliest. The case against Laura Hall is more complicated. The prosecution argues that she may have acted out of blind love for Colton. Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a shop towel, and even the gun used. However, the defense argues that these traces only prove her involvement in dumping the body, not the initial act. They can't prove she fired the first shot. Laura claims she only learned about the case after Colton told her about it and that she was forced to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses to their time in Mexico said the couple seemed happy on the trip. In 2007, Laura was convicted of obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence and sentenced to 6 years in prison. A subsequent trial in 2010 increased the sentence to 11 years in prison and a $144,000 fine. Laura was eventually released on parole on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring. She completed her sentence in August of that year. After her parole, Laura's whereabouts remain unknown. Colton Petoniak remains in prison after multiple unsuccessful appeals. In his appeals, Colton claims he has no memory of the events surrounding Jennifer's death. However, he asserts that several witnesses heard Laura confess to the crime and that the prosecution knowingly withheld this information from his defense team, potentially setting him up. Despite Colton's allegations, his appeals have been denied, raising public questions about the case. Jennifer's parents, however, firmly believe that Laura was more involved in the death than she admits and that her punishment was too lenient. Unlike Colton, Laura has shown no remorse or regret for Jennifer's death, referring to her in derogatory terms. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sherry Miller. Sherry Miller was born on October 13, 1971, in Flint, Michigan, a once prosperous Midwestern auto industry city that had fallen on hard times. Her childhood was marked by hardship, growing up without a father figure in her life. Her mother led a loose lifestyle, often drinking heavily and changing partners frequently. Sherry's childhood was spent in a trailer next to her mother's men, who regularly abused her. According to Sherry, she was abused from the age of 3 or 4. By the age of 16, she had left to fend for herself. At 17, she married, became pregnant, and had a child. However, her marriage eventually ended. Sherry remarried and divorced again. Her second husband, Tribby, had a history of violence and was convicted of second-degree child abuse for assaulting his own child, resulting in multiple skull fractures. Although Tribby was tried for abusing her 6-year-old daughter, he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. By the age of 26, Sherry was a single mother of 3 children, each from a different father. To support her family, she worked multiple jobs. Although she may not be a model, Sherry possessed a charm that drew people to her. In 1997, Sherry's life changed when she started working as an accountant at B&O Auto Salvage, a company owned by 47-year-old Bruce Miller. It was there that she saw a man who could provide for her and her children. Bruce Miller was born on July 26, 1951. He spent many years working at General Motors. After leaving General Motors, Bruce Miller moved into the auto scrap business, where he would collect old cars and resell their parts. Bruce Miller was married 3 times and had a passion for racing and socializing. He was known for his generosity and openness to others. When Sherry joined his company as an employee, Bruce Miller initially wasn't interested in her romantically. However, Sherry eventually caught his attention, and they began an office romance despite their 20-year age difference. Their relationship progressed quickly. Bruce Miller was delighted with the attention Sherry was getting, and the couple quickly moved from dating to living together. Just 4 months later, on April 23, 1999, Bruce Miller and Sherry were married in Las Vegas. Sherry and her children moved in with Bruce Miller, finding the stability she craved. Bruce Miller's brother, Chuck Miller, said she thought Bruce Miller was the best thing that ever happened to her, finally having a normal life. However, Chuck Miller's wife was concerned about Sherry's overspending, maxing out credit cards and running out of available cash. Bruce Miller seemed unconcerned and largely ignored the issue. Sherry also worked, selling Mary Kay cosmetics to customers at home. Bruce Miller bought Sherry a computer to help monitor the account. In 1999, while using her home computer to research vacation destinations, Sherry stumbled upon adult chat rooms on the internet. Before social media and text messaging became popular, people often used online chat rooms to connect with others. Some of these chat rooms had adult content and allowed users to anonymously flirt and engage in virtual relationships. Bruce Miller knew that Sherry had been flirting with other people in these online chat rooms. However, he considered this behavior harmless and chose to trust her, not wanting to create tension in their marriage. Sherry quickly became comfortable in a virtual world, regularly logging into chat rooms and sharing her deepest desires with strangers under various pseudonyms. One of the men Sherry met online was Jerry Cassidy, who used the pseudonym Rena Dudes. Jerry was born on October 6, 1960, in Kansas City, Missouri, having been married, raised a son, and enjoyed deer hunting with his brothers. Jerry also had aspirations of becoming an FBI agent. Later, after becoming a police officer, Jerry exposed corruption in the police department by reporting falsified records to a colleague. However, this decision resulted in him being demoted and eventually forced to resign after 9 years of service. Despite doing the right thing, after losing his career, Jerry suffered from depression and began to abuse alcohol and drugs. During this period, his marriage fell apart. However, he managed to pick himself up and moved to Reno, Nevada, where he took a job as a security guard at Harrah's Casino. In his spare time, he frequented online chat rooms, where he eventually met Sherry. Jerry and Sherry began exchanging messages, which led to a face-to-face meeting in Reno in July 1999. Sherry attended a Mary Kay convention with a friend, using it as an opportunity to meet Jerry in person. Their online romance quickly turned into a physical relationship, giving Jerry hope that his life was about to improve. Sherry presented herself as a wealthy businesswoman who was married to a disabled man and was seeking a discreet sexual encounter. Jerry believed her story. Jerry was deeply infatuated with Sherry, telling his friend Carol Slaughter that she was extremely active in the bedroom. During the summer and fall, Sherry used her cosmetics business as a cover for secret trips to Reno, where she would meet Jerry. When they were apart, they exchanged sexually explicit messages and videos over the internet. They even went so far as to rename their online accounts, with Sherry calling herself Jerry's Fool and Jerry calling himself Sherry's Fool. Despite being an ex-cop, Jerry failed to see the warning signs, blinded by the affectionate emails. It seemed like Jerry was an easy target for Sherry. She quickly convinced Jerry that he needed to kill her husband. Those who knew Jerry noticed a significant change in him under her influence. In September, Sherry announced to Jerry that she was pregnant with his child. What Jerry did not know, however, was that Sherry had had a tubal ligation in 1995 and was unable to have children. Despite this, Sherry told Jerry that her husband, Bruce Miller, had discovered the pregnancy and beaten her, causing her to miscarry. Sherry then announced that she was pregnant again, this time with twins. Believing her lies, Jerry begged Sherry to leave her husband, take their supposed future children, and live with him. Sherry revealed that she could not leave her husband Bruce Miller because of his mafia ties, and she feared for her and Jerry's lives. During this time, Jerry got into trouble and was arrested at a casino for being drunk and disorderly. Their online communication stopped while Jerry was in custody. After his release, Jerry decided to protect Sherry from her husband by creating distance. Jerry returned to his family in Missouri, and the couple maintained their relationship through online chat rooms. Sherry continued to update Jerry, sharing photos of her pregnancy. Jerry was eager to believe it. However, on November 5, 1999, Jerry received an email purportedly from Bruce Miller stating that he knew about the pregnancy and vowed to prevent the child from being born. Concerned, Jerry tried to contact Sherry, who eventually sent him a text saying she needed to leave for a few days and would contact him later. The next day, Jerry received another text from Bruce Miller claiming that he had pressured Sherry into having an abortion. The text included pictures of Sherry, beaten and bruised. Jerry believes that Bruce Miller killed his unborn twins. Angry and grief-stricken, Jerry blames Bruce Miller for the deaths of his 3 children, including the twins, and the abuse of Sherry. On November 8, Jerry confided in Sherry that he could no longer continue the situation. Jerry was going to kill her husband, Bruce Miller. The couple then devised a plan to kill Bruce Miller, mapping out the route, parking, location, and best time to dispose of the body. Jerry drove from his home to Michigan to carry out the plan. That evening, as Bruce Miller was getting ready to leave work, Sherry called him and told him to pick up pizza on the way home, as planned. Jerry was waiting, and when Bruce Miller showed up, Jerry shot Bruce Miller with a 20-gauge shotgun. After the murder, Jerry returned home, and Sherry began the next part of her plan. She called Bruce Miller's brother, Chuck Miller, expressing concern about her husband being gone for so long and asked him to check on Bruce Miller at the junkyard. When Chuck Miller arrived, he found Bruce Miller lying dead in a pool of blood. Witnesses reported that Bruce Miller had been shot in the chest at close range with a shotgun. When his wife Sherry heard the news, she began screaming and crying. Police found no evidence of a suspect. They discovered that Bruce Miller often carried large amounts of cash and initially suspected his death was the result of a robbery because his wallet was missing. None of the leads came up and the case was soon closed. Meanwhile, according to Bruce Miller's sister, Judy Miller, Sherry's behavior was not that of a grieving wife. 2 days after Bruce Miller's death, Sherry was spotted dancing at a bar in Otisville, Michigan. Within 2 weeks, she had found a new partner, Jeff Foster, a local delivery boy, and her relationship with Jerry was over. However, Jerry had hope. After killing Bruce Miller, he and Sherry would be together. But Sherry began to distance herself from Jerry. A month after the murder, she brought her new boyfriend, Jeff Foster, into her home and broke things off with Jerry, leaving him heartbroken. At this point, Jerry probably realized he had unjustly taken a life and was haunted by guilt. Jerry began to investigate, and he discovered that Sherry had lied and fabricated the whole thing. 3 months later, on February 11, 2000, Jerry committed suicide in his apartment in Odessa, Missouri, with a .22 caliber rifle. His body was found sitting with an open Bible on his lap. Jerry had condemned himself, accepted his guilt, and executed himself. Jerry's mother revealed in an interview that while cleaning the apartment, she accidentally found a briefcase hidden under the bed. Outside the briefcase was an envelope, and inside, they found 3 suicide notes. The contents of the letters indicate that Jerry confessed to killing Bruce Miller because he believed that Bruce Miller had abused Sherry and killed Jerry's 3 unborn children. However, the letters also made it clear that Sherry had lied to Jerry about the acts that Sherry had accused Bruce Miller of. In the letter, Jerry said that he went there and killed Bruce Miller. At the time, he was stupid and didn't realize the consequences of his actions. Now the truth about his depression is finally coming to light. He couldn't share his secret with anyone, and it consumed him. The truth is that Sherry wanted her husband dead so she could get the money. She got what she wanted, but she will soon learn that her actions will have consequences. He now understood that Sherry's actions were all a ruse. She had no qualms about hurting people. To back up his claim, Jerry provided transcripts of their text conversations. In between their intimate exchanges, Sherry had coached Jerry on how to locate dumpsters, where to park without being detected, and other important details. On February 22, 2000, the Jerry family's attorneys contacted the Jesse County Sheriff's Department with this new information. The police waited for Sherry Miller at the airport as she returned from a trip to Reno with her boyfriend, Jeff Foster. Sherry was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Police described Sherry as a skilled manipulator who tricked her lover into killing her husband under false pretenses. Despite overwhelming evidence against her, Sherry maintained her innocence to her husband Bruce Miller's family. Her trial began on December 12, 2000, in Michigan, attracting national attention due to the internet-related crime. The prosecution presented thousands of text messages between Sherry and Jerry, exposing her deception. According to the prosecution, Sherry's motive for wanting her husband Bruce Miller dead was financial gain. However, the defense argued that Sherry only received a minimal amount of money after Bruce Miller died. The defense argued that Jerry, acting as a jilted lover, fabricated evidence against Sherry. Sherry maintained that the nature of their online communications was purely imaginative and not based on fact. Furthermore, she admitted to lying about her pregnancy, saying her intention was to help relieve Jerry's depression. She also admitted to falsely claiming abuse in order to convince Jerry to stop contacting her. Sherry adamantly denied writing the messages describing the crimes, instead claiming that Jerry, a former homicide detective, created them using his expertise. However, evidence of these messages was discovered on Sherry's computer. Sherry Miller was found guilty on December 22 and received a life sentence for the murder charge, as well as a 54 to 81-year sentence for conspiracy. In 2007, while incarcerated, Sherry was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions. She began treatment, filed an appeal, and even got married for the 4th time. Michael DeNoia was drawn to Sherry's story after seeing it on the news. Michael contacted her and they began corresponding. In 2008, Michael visited Sherry in prison and proposed to her. Although reports claim they were married in April 2008, there is no concrete evidence to support this. Sherry's fortunes changed when she won an appeal in 2008, resulting in her release from prison in 2009. A federal judge overturned her conviction, ruling that Jerry's suicide letter was inadmissible as evidence because it couldn't be scrutinized through cross-examination. The judge ordered a new trial and set bail, allowing Sherry to be released. In 2012, Sherry was sent back to prison to resume serving her original sentence after the court re-evaluated the admissibility of Jerry's suicide letter. Having spent 3 years outside, Sherry continued to maintain her innocence. In 2016, Sherry sent a 4-page typewritten letter to a district judge, abruptly confessing to her role in Bruce Miller's death. The sudden admission stunned everyone, as it was thought that Sherry would never voluntarily take responsibility. In the letter, Sherry wrote, "A pivotal moment came when she was forced to return to prison after 3 years of freedom. She had been living with her daughter and granddaughter, and she begged her daughter not to come with her when she was sent back to prison. However, her daughter refused to listen. As she walked through the prison doors, she turned around and saw her daughter crying, screaming, 'No, Mom, no, don't go.' It was then that she realized the devastation her crime had caused Bruce Miller and Bruce Miller's loved ones, including Jerry and his family." In a public interview in 2022 on a popular television channel, Sherry made some shocking confessions. She said that Bruce Miller had no connections to the mafia and had never abused her. Instead, she admitted that she used makeup to fake bruises and created fake ultrasound scans to trick Jerry. According to her, her motive was not financial gain. She claimed that she was afraid that Bruce Miller would discover her true nature. Sherry stated that sharing her story publicly helped her find some inner peace. However, she still struggles with guilt and shame, admitting it's difficult to look at herself in the mirror knowing what she did. After waiting for an opportunity to reveal the truth and find some sense of peace, Sherry remains imprisoned at the Huron Valley Women's Complex in Michigan. Sherry Miller has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Drew Shoden. Drew Katrina Shoden was born on September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Alan and Linda Shoden. She had an older brother, Sven. When Drew was 3, her parents divorced, but they remained on good terms. Her mother later married Sid Walker, a travel agent, and they raised Drew and her brother in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, a scenic vacation spot in Minnesota. Throughout high school, Drew excelled academically, earning honors and developed a passion for golf and art. Her true love was art, and her room was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and friends. After graduating from high school, Drew attended the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. Those who knew her described her as a lively and caring person who loved to help others. She enjoyed traveling and exploring the country, with a dream of visiting Australia. In fact, she had plans to travel there in the spring of 2004. Before the event, Drew had 2 part-time jobs to save money. She worked as a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and as a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew finished her 4 p.m. shift at Victoria's Secret in Columbia Mall. She then went shopping and bought a purse from a store. After shopping, Drew walked to her car in the parking lot and called her boyfriend, Chris Lang. During the call, Drew suddenly said, "Okay, okay," and their connection was lost. Chris didn't think much of it since their conversation wasn't important, so he didn't call her back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again. When he answered, he only heard the sound of wind and phone buttons beeping. In a later television interview, Chris recalled his thoughts when the call with Drew was interrupted. At the time, he didn't sense any urgency and didn't imagine that something terrible was happening. He thought it was just a typical cell phone disconnection. It wasn't until later that he realized the call had been cut off for a much more sinister reason. Drew didn't show up for work at a nightclub, causing her colleagues to worry. Around the same time, her friend and roommate Meg Murphy got a call from the nightclub asking about Drew's whereabouts. Meg didn't know where Drew was and started searching for her by contacting their mutual friends and the local hospital, but she didn't find any leads. By 9 p.m., with no progress, Meg contacted the police, telling them that Drew worked at Columbia Mall. The police sent an officer to the mall, but it was already closed by the time they arrived. While searching the parking lot, the officer found Drew's car. When they inspected the vehicle, they discovered it was unlocked and showed no signs of a struggle or any evidence of a crime. However, they did find a black knife sheath on the ground near the car. The car's interior showed no evidence of theft, with personal belongings including papers, a wallet, and a newly purchased purse still on the seat, indicating that robbery was unlikely to be a motive for any trouble Drew might have encountered. With Drew's friends, boyfriend, and parents unaware of her whereabouts, investigators suspected a possible kidnapping. The investigation initially focused on Chris Lang as the prime suspect, but he was quickly ruled out after it was confirmed that he had a solid alibi, having been 300 miles away in Minnesota at the time of the incident. The police obtained information from Chris about 2 phone calls he had with Drew. The first call was suddenly cut off, and the second call, which took place a few hours later, picked up background noises, including wind sounds and button pressing. The investigators went to the mall where Drew worked the next day to review the security footage. Although there were no cameras in the parking lot where Drew's car was parked, there were multiple cameras inside the mall. Upon reviewing the footage, detectives found a clip of Drew entering a store after her shift. At 4:55 p.m., she calmly purchased a purse, wearing a pink sweater and holding a jacket. After paying, she put on her jacket and left the store, calling Chris on her way out. This call was made at exactly 5 p.m. As we know, their conversation was suddenly interrupted at 5:04 p.m. after Drew said, "Okay." To recreate the events surrounding Drew's disappearance, a detective conducted an experiment. He set a timer for 4 minutes, the length of the interrupted call, and walked from the store where Drew bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the timer went off, the detective had reached the parking lot near where Drew's car was found. This suggested that something must have happened to Drew while she was at her car. The investigation was hindered by the lack of surveillance cameras in the parking lot. Despite this challenge, Drew's disappearance generated widespread media attention, prompting a massive response from the public. Alongside the police, over 1,000 volunteers joined the search for Drew, and FBI officers were also involved in the investigation. Drew's last phone call was traced to Fisher, Minnesota, a 30-minute drive from her workplace. The surrounding area is rural, with vast fields. To search for clues, police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to scour the fields. They also asked local landowners to check their properties, but this initial search yielded no leads. As the investigation continued, the search area expanded daily. 4 days later, a boot was found under a bridge in Crookston, a small town about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew vanished. Notably, a roommate remembered Drew wearing those boots on the day she disappeared. Forensic analysis later confirmed the boot belonged to Drew. In the Crookston area, further searches yielded no new leads, so the investigation turned its focus back to the Columbia Mall surveillance footage. This time, detectives scrutinized hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, searching for signs of the abductor. They suspected that the person responsible might have been following Drew and could be visible in the footage. After hours of monitoring, the investigators identified a suspicious individual. The man was seen wandering aimlessly around the mall, not purchasing anything, and appeared more interested in observing the people around him than the products on sale. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit, continuing to watch people pass by. About 10 minutes later, he got up and walked away, wearing black gloves on his hands. After observing the man stand up and leave his seat, investigators made a crucial connection that he only did so when a blonde woman, pushing a grocery cart, walked by him and headed towards the parking lot. The detectives were convinced that this was not a mere coincidence, but rather the man had deliberately selected a potential target and was now following her. The police had no leads on the mysterious woman who was almost kidnapped at the mall, but Drew Shoden was the only person who vanished that day. Given their resemblance, it's possible the kidnapper had a specific type in mind, and so Drew was the next target. Drew left the mall around 5 p.m. when it was already dark, which could have made it easier for the perpetrator to strike. The investigation focused on 3 key locations: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where one of her shoes was found. The FBI reviewed the files of all registered sex offenders in these areas, comparing their photos to the image of the suspicious man from the mall. The only individual who fit the description was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a man with a criminal record marked by repeated offenses against women. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., now 50, has spent 23 years in prison. He was born in Laredo, Texas, in 1953 to migrant worker parents. He was the second of 5 children. Rodriguez described his childhood as unhappy, citing his parents' excessive criticism and unreasonableness. For 15 years, his family moved from state to state before settling in Crookston in 1963. As he grew older, Rodriguez became increasingly isolated, partly due to language barriers. As a Spanish speaker, he struggled with English, making school challenging. He dropped out in the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez alleged that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he believed sparked his hostility towards women. In 1974, at 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead took her to a driveway in Crookston, where he attacked her, grabbing her throat and trying to force her into submission. The following month, Rodriguez targeted another woman who was sitting in a parked truck outside a movie theater in Crookston. He threatened her with a knife and instructed her to follow him to a secluded rural area where he sexually assaulted her. In 1979, Rodriguez attempted to abduct a 69-year-old high school English teacher who was walking alone at night in Crookston. When he tried to force her into his car, she resisted. Enraged, Rodriguez stabbed her in the elbow and abdomen with a knife. Despite her injuries, she managed to escape and ran to safety. The teacher, who was also a skilled artist, created a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him. This sketch ultimately led to his arrest. Rodriguez was found guilty of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He served his sentence until his release in May 2003. Notably, Rodriguez was released from prison just 6 months before Drew's disappearance, and he was registered as a high-risk sex offender, indicating that he was likely to reoffend. Alfonso Rodriguez's family expressed concerns to the Minnesota Department of Corrections that he might revert to his old ways before his prison release. But he was released since he had served his full sentence. After his release, Rodriguez moved in with his mother in Crookston, near the bridge where Drew's shoe was found, which wasn't in his favor. Detectives questioned Rodriguez, who denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. He claimed to have visited the Columbia Mall on the day she vanished, saying he watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico at the movie theater. However, investigators discovered that no Grand Forks movie theaters were showing that film on that day. After searching Rodriguez's car, the police came to a sad realization: Drew was probably no longer alive. According to Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill, the search had shifted from a rescue mission to a recovery effort. In the interior of Rodriguez's car, forensic experts discovered dark red stains in several areas, which were later confirmed to be Drew's blood. The blood was found on the rear passenger window, back seat, and 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The DNA from the blood matched Drew's DNA, which was obtained from her toothbrush. A folding knife was found in the trunk of Rodriguez's car, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot near Drew's vehicle. A receipt showed that Rodriguez had purchased the knife and sheath from a nearby hardware store. Although Drew's body was not found, the evidence was sufficient to charge Rodriguez with her disappearance 8 days later. Rodriguez was arrested and held in a Grand Forks jail. He denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance and refused to cooperate with investigators. Despite the evidence against him, he refused to provide any information about Drew's whereabouts. During a brief bond hearing, his bail was set at $5 million. The search for Drew persisted despite the suspect's silence, focusing on 3 towns. However, the search was hampered by heavy, unprecedented snowfall in the area. To aid in the search, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota held a press conference on December 9th, pledging to deploy several hundred National Guard members and state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven expressed that Drew's disappearance had affected every North Dakotan, while Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty commended the community and police for their cooperation. Despite their efforts, no results were found, and the search was eventually suspended due to deteriorating weather conditions. When spring arrived, the search resumed with renewed intensity. As the winter snow began to melt, searchers hoped to finally find Drew after 5 long months. Unfortunately, it wasn't until April 17, 2004, that her body was discovered in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from where the boot was initially found. Drew's family was devastated when they received the heartbreaking news. Her father described the moment, saying that they had been waiting for that call, and when it came, it felt like time had stopped. This was their worst fear come true, and it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The body was found in a field that had already been searched, but the large snowdrifts had concealed it. The circumstances of the crime were immediately apparent. Drew was naked from the waist down, her hands were tied behind her back, and a rope was around her neck. There were also signs of a plastic bag having been placed over her head before the rope was tied. DNA evidence linked to Rodriguez was found on Drew's jacket. An autopsy revealed that she had been subjected to a brutal beating and stabbing before her death. The medical examiner identified 3 possible causes of death: the neck wound, suffocation, or hypothermia. Drew Chaudin's family was finally able to say goodbye to her on April 24, 2004, after months of uncertainty. A mourning ceremony in North Dakota was attended by around 1,500 people. The crime involved both North Dakota and Minnesota, which made it a federal crime since Drew was taken across state lines. This meant the prosecutor's office could pursue the death penalty for Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. Rodriguez was found guilty of Drew's murder on August 30, 2006, and the jury recommended the death sentence. Judge Ralph Erickson sentenced him to death on February 8, 2007, citing the senseless and violent nature of his crime. Notably, Rodriguez became the first person to be sentenced to death in North Dakota in almost a century. However, even after 6 years on death row, Rodriguez refused to admit his guilt. It wasn't until June 28, 2013, that he finally confessed to kidnapping and killing Drew. But the story is not over yet. Ralph Erickson, a former district judge, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge and later reversed his own decision that had sentenced Rodriguez to death. In 2021, he ordered a new sentencing phase, emphasized that Rodriguez's guilt was clear and question, confirmed by multiple DNA tests. The issue at hand is the appropriateness of the death penalty in this case. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing 2 key reasons. Firstly, the defense attorneys failed to thoroughly investigate Rodriguez's mental health. Secondly, forensic expert Michael McGee's testimony was misleading. McGee claimed that Rodriguez had violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of her abduction, but there was no concrete evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to Erickson, McGee's opinion was not based on facts and misled him, influencing his original verdict. Despite reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that the circumstances of Drew's body being found naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back suggested a sexually motivated crime, even without Rodriguez's seminal fluid being present. Judge Erickson ruled that Alfonso Rodriguez's constitutional rights were violated because his mental health was not properly examined, both in general and at the time of his crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Asel Noyaba. Asel Noyaba was born in 1986 in Tokmak, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, she took hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to work in a salon. There, she met Azamat Estebesov, who came to her salon for a haircut. They hit it off, and he invited her out for coffee. Asel's family approved of Azamat, who was religious and respectful of Muslim traditions. At 19, she married him, and soon they had a son. However, Azamat's behavior changed, and he became abusive. One evening, while bathing their son, Azamat accidentally poured too much water on him, causing the child to cry. Asel reacted angrily, and Azamat responded by hitting her in the face. Asel left with her son and went to her mother's house. Azamat apologized and begged for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. However, Asel, who had grown up without a father, was determined to make her marriage work for the sake of her son. She believed Azamat's apology and thought they could move forward. The family returned to Tokmak, and Asel became pregnant with their second child. However, Azamat's abuse continued. One day, while Asel was walking with her son, she ran into some classmates, and after the walk, Azamat struck her again. Asel suffered a devastating blow from her husband Azamat, which caused her to fall and miscarry. This incident triggered a pattern of abuse, with Azamat constantly looking for excuses to beat her. Despite his once kind and attentive nature, Azamat's gaze was now filled with anger and hatred. Asel felt trapped, living under Azamat's total control, and her only solace was her children. Her mother, aware of the situation, eventually took Asel in, but Azamat continued to harass her, begging for forgiveness and promising to change. However, he would return to his abusive ways, and Asel would be forced to endure it. Asel went to the police multiple times, but domestic violence is not punishable by law in Kyrgyzstan, and Azamat would only receive short sentences. The abuse continued for 6 years, with Azamat threatening to kill Asel and her family if she ever filed for divorce. Asel's family finally helped her escape to Italy, where she worked multiple jobs to save money and become financially independent. After 3.5 years, she had enough to buy an apartment and start a business. Although she was relieved to be free from Azamat's abuse, she missed her children and worried about their well-being. When Asel returned to Kyrgyzstan, she was shocked to find her children living in squalid conditions, neglected and uneducated. Azamat had raised them according to traditional Turkic values, forcing them to attend a madrasa instead of school. Asel took her children back, but Azamat continued to harass her, eventually cornering her and raping her in a dark alley. Asel reported the incident to the police, and Azamat was detained. However, his family intervened, pressuring Asel to withdraw her complaint. According to Kyrgyz tradition, it is shameful for she to report her husband's abuse, and Azamat's relatives convinced Asel to retract her statement in exchange for Azamat's relinquishment of parental rights. Asel's ex-husband, Azamat, remained her official father despite his abuse. In fact, the Sakalu District Court dismissed a case against him due to a counter-application and reconciliation. However, after his release, Azamat began harassing and threatening Asel, sending her daily messages saying he would kill her if he caught her. He waited for her at her driveway, work, and followed her everywhere for 3 months. Asel's relatives took turns living with her and her children to protect her, but this didn't save her from Azamat's second violent attack. On January 31, 2023, Asel reported to the police again that Azamat had used force against her, and a criminal case was opened. The suspect was detained, but instead of a 5-year imprisonment, he was given 3 years of probation due to his elderly mother's disability and his 2 children. Asel was devastated and felt driven into a corner with no escape. She didn't believe anyone and didn't listen to Azamat's relatives. Instead, she hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the CH Regional Court, providing all the threatening messages and voice recordings. However, a series of events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asel's life. Azamat continued to walk freely and make attempts on her life, even sending her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and rope, saying he was ready to meet her. On September 20, 2023, Asel woke up her children, had breakfast with them, and accompanied her eldest son to school. As she was about to leave the house, Azamat suddenly appeared and hit her on the head twice. He then grabbed her throat and started strangling her, causing her to lose consciousness. When Asel regained consciousness, she realized that her son was crying and begging Azamat not to harm him. Azamat threw Asel to the floor, picked her up, and continued to abuse her. He stabbed her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Asel regained consciousness, she was surrounded by blood and didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood and her throat was dry, and all she could do was ask for a drink. Asel's ex-husband, Azamat Estebesov, brought her a bucket containing water mixed with blood, revealing his sinister intentions. He started selecting a knife from the kitchen, preparing to inflict harm. His goal was to reach Asel's heart, implying a deep and fatal wound. Just as he was about to attack, the police burst into the house, responding to a call from a concerned neighbor who had heard Asel's screams and knew about her troubled past with Azamat. This timely intervention saved Asel's life. Azamat resisted the officers, attacking them with a knife. Amidst the chaos, the brutal extent of the attack was unclear, but the apartment was covered in blood. It was later revealed that Azamat had started cutting Asel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen, severing her nose and ears, inflicting multiple wounds on her face and neck, cutting her throat, and beating her severely. When the district police officers arrived, they quickly called an ambulance, assessing the severity of Asel's injuries. In their search for the removed organs, they were unable to find them. Her ears and nose were shockingly found in the monster's pocket. After finding her, the police took Asel to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek, but surprisingly, the doctors refused to provide her with first aid, claiming she didn't belong to their hospital based on her regional identity card. Not only did the doctors neglect to treat Asel, but they also failed to stop her bleeding. It wasn't until she was taken to a second hospital that she finally received first aid and the bleeding was stopped. Asel was then transferred to the National Hospital, where she underwent a 9-hour operation. A team of 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore her face, carefully reattaching her severed organs, including her earlobes and nerve nodes, which had been precisely cut off with a special knife. The nose was also completely severed. Asel remained unconscious for a long time after the operation, but miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that her recovery would be a long and perilous journey. She was brutally attacked and left disfigured. The authorities launched a criminal investigation into the incident, resulting in the detention of the suspect, who was sent to a pretrial detention center on September 27, 2023. The suspect, Azamat Estebesov, was initially sentenced to a lesser punishment, but thanks to a presidential decree, his sentence was increased to 8 years of imprisonment. The presidential decree also led to the dismissal of 9 judges, including Kelbek Toto Mamatov from the Soik District Court of the CH region, who had previously released Estebesov under probation supervision. The judges were dismissed due to violations of the Code of Conduct for Judges. The authorities then reopened all previous cases involving Estebesov, with 6 investigators re-examining the evidence. As a result, they found new evidence and brought new charges against him, with a total of 11 articles in the updated indictment. Azamat Estebesov's trial concluded on January 26, 2024. After investigative activities ended in December 2023, Estebasov denied all 11 charges against him and refused to answer the judge's questions, sometimes claiming demonic possession. He also behaved aggressively towards witnesses, leading to a trial postponement. Judge Tulkadir Kulova ultimately sentenced Estebasov to 20 years in prison without parole, plus a fine of 880,000 sums to the state and 2 million sums to his ex-wife. 1 day in pretrial detention counted as 2 in the sentencing. Estebasov appealed, but the sentence remained unchanged. Asel Noyaba, Estebasov's ex-wife, expressed her intention to continue seeking justice, demanding life imprisonment for her former spouse and punishment for those who enabled his actions. She hopes to set an example to prevent other women in Kyrgyzstan from suffering as she and her family have. Asel Noyaba's family and activists are demanding a life sentence for her ex-husband, Azamat, who continued to send threatening texts to Asel even after being imprisoned, warning her that he would find her when he got out. This case has highlighted the powerlessness of women in the face of the law in Kyrgyzstan and how a loving partner can suddenly turn into a ruthless aggressor. The case has sparked widespread outrage across Kyrgyzstan, prompting Asel's sister, Diana Yelin, to appeal to members of parliament to pass a law on domestic violence. She warned that if they failed to do so, she would hold them accountable for their inaction, emphasizing that one wrong decision could have devastating consequences. Asel's sister also launched a petition calling for Azamat to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. Asel's sister stated that her sister's experiences with domestic abuse were a stark reminder of the dangers of violent partners. She recounted that even after divorcing her husband 5 years ago due to his physical and emotional abuse, he had continued to stalk, beat, and torment her. She asserted that people like Azamat Estebasov posed a significant threat to society and should not be allowed to roam free, describing them as obsessive and dangerous individuals who belonged behind bars. She demanded a life sentence without parole for the person who had already inflicted severe emotional trauma on his victim. She urged everyone to sign the petition, regardless of where the heinous crime had taken place. She emphasized that domestic violence could take many monstrous forms and that it was essential for women worldwide to unite against this issue. She reminded everyone that a person's religious beliefs did not guarantee their moral character. She mentioned that Asel had started a new life, but her new identity had brought her immense pain. Although her physical wounds were slowly healing, recovering her hearing and breathing functions would be a long and arduous process. In a recent interview, Asel had shared the heartbreaking experience of seeing her face for the first time after the tragedy. Asel had said that she wasn't allowed to look at herself in mirrors, so there weren't any in her room. One day, when her doctors were away, she had taken advantage of the situation to go to the first floor to get dressed. As she was removing her bandages, she had caught a glimpse of herself in a metal operating lamp that the on-duty doctor had left behind. Seeing her reflection had shocked her so much that she had lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asel's brother decided to let her see her face while dressing her at home. To prepare, he removed all the mirrors in the house except for one in the bathroom that couldn't be taken down. When he briefly left the room, Asel quickly got up and took a look at herself in the mirror. The shock was too much, and she fainted. She was overcome with hysteria, saying that no one should ever have to see such ugliness. However, Asel still had a long way to go before her face could be fully restored. Before undergoing plastic surgery, she would need multiple operations to rebuild her face, including reconstructing her ears and nose. These surgeries would require extensive preparation, skin grafting, and a recovery period of at least a year. Additionally, Asel had lost 20% of her hearing, which would also need to be corrected. Asel Noyaba, she who was brutally mutilated by her ex-husband, requires a series of complex operations to restore her ears and nose. Unfortunately, these operations cannot be performed in Kyrgyzstan and must be done in a country like Turkey, which requires a significant amount of money. A Turkish plastic surgeon, Miki Sur, offered to perform the surgery for free, covering all costs. However, after examining Asel, he realized that plastic surgery alone would not be enough. She needs a series of operations to restore her organs before the reconstructive surgery can take place. The total cost of the surgeries is estimated to be at least $445,000. Asel's sister, Diana Yellen, is working to raise awareness and funds for the operation, which will take place in Turkey. So far, they have not yet raised even half of the needed $45,000, and there are additional expenses for accommodation, psychological support, rehabilitation, interpretation, medication, and more. Diana Yellen shared heartbreaking photos of her sister Asel, who was brutally attacked by her ex-husband, leaving her face severely disfigured. The doctors did everything they could to save her, but unfortunately, her ears and nose were beyond repair. Diana is outraged and frustrated with the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan, who allowed her sister's attacker to walk free on probation just a year ago. She believes that if the judge had made a stricter decision, Asel's ordeal could have been prevented. To raise awareness about domestic violence against women, Diana is organizing fundraising events to help her sister's recovery and rehabilitation. Asel, who has endured 12 years of abuse, dreams of opening a foundation to support women who have suffered similar traumas. Diana wants to spread a powerful message to women everywhere. Never tolerate abuse and do not expect your abuser to change. Instead, run away and never look back. The true ugliness lies not in Asel's disfigured face, but in the heart of her ex-husband, who committed this heinous act. Diana warns that if they cannot raise sufficient funds to support Asel's recovery, she will be forced to share her sister's graphic photos to shame the authorities into taking action. She appeals to every judge, policeman, and deputy to take a close look at Asel's face and remember the consequences of their inaction. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Fusako Sano. Fusako Sano, later known as Sachiko Yamada, was born on November 28, 1980, in Mitsuke, a small town in Niigata Prefecture, Japan. She came from an average-income family and was a beloved child. She attended a local school, enjoyed baseball, and supported the local team. On November 13, 1990, 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, Fusako, then in the 4th grade, was walking home from school after staying late to watch a baseball game. Her parents were aware of her schedule, so they weren't worried when she walked home alone on her usual route. The cold autumn evening was dark, with few pedestrians and cars passing by quickly. Suddenly, a car overtook her and screeched to a halt, swerving in front of her. This sudden event marked a turning point in Fusako's life. Nobuyuki Sat, the kidnapper, was born on July 15, 1962, in Niigata Prefecture, Japan, into a wealthy family. His family's successful business was related to passenger transportation. As the youngest child, Nobuyuki was spoiled and capricious, with no limits set for him. He was emotional and sometimes aggressive when his demands weren't met immediately. His father was 62, and his mother was 37 when he was born, and he had 5 older siblings from his father's previous marriage, but he didn't have a close relationship with them. Nobuyuki's behavior was often erratic and challenging. On one occasion, he even threw a tantrum in a store, physically lashing out at his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. At school, his peculiar behavior and difficulty interacting with others made it hard for him to make friends. His tall stature, which embarrassed him, led to teasing and unkind nicknames, causing him to slouch to try to minimize his height. Despite his father's efforts to provide him with a comfortable and spacious room in their luxurious European-style home, Nobuyuki was unhappy and afraid to be alone in the room. His restless behavior and irrational fears prompted his parents to seek professional help from a doctor. The boy was first examined at a regular hospital and then sent to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed him with several anxiety disorders, including a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique combination of 2 other phobias. On one hand, he had autophobia, which is a fear of being alone. On the other hand, he also had sociophobia, which is a fear of social interactions. This meant that he was equally afraid of being by himself and of being around other people. Nobuki was a loner throughout his life. Despite being attractive, he never had a girlfriend in high school, nor did he have any friends. His peers shunned him, and he became an outcast. As a result, he took out his frustrations on his elderly parents, who always forgave him and tried to make him happy with gifts and money. As an adult, Nobuki struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into trouble, clashed with coworkers, and neglected his responsibilities, making him unemployable. He would often leave work early for frivolous reasons, such as feeling sad because it was raining. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female colleague, likely to get her attention. The incident was deemed an accident, but Nobuki was immediately fired. He never found another job and relied on his parents for financial support. Over time, Nobuki became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and his conflicts with his parents escalated. After a particularly heated argument, Nobuki set a fire in his own home, which nearly destroyed the entire house and its occupants. After being sent to a psychiatric clinic for compulsory treatment, Sato was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, which involves intense dislike and hatred towards women. He stayed in the hospital for over a month before being discharged, deemed no longer a threat to others. For a while, Nobuyuki seemed calm and even started rebuilding and expanding his partially burned house. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction. As time passed, Sato became increasingly withdrawn and isolated, spending most of his time alone in his room watching TV. He started to shut out his parents, refusing to let them enter not only his room, but also the entire second floor. If they violated this boundary, he would lash out at them violently, shouting and threatening them with death. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks near a local school, where he would closely observe the female students. Initially, he kept his distance and didn't attempt to approach or contact anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a 9-year-old girl at the school gate, threw her over his shoulder, and ran to his nearby parked car. The incident occurred in front of other children, who immediately shouted for help. A school security guard and bystanders quickly responded, rescuing her and detaining Nobuyuki before the police arrived. Unable to explain his motives, Nobuyuki was charged with attempting to commit violent acts against a minor. He faced a potential prison sentence, but during his trial in August 1989, Nobuyuki received only a year's probation. According to some reports, his father's connections and payment of a large sum of money influenced the outcome. Furthermore, Nobuyuki's name was mysteriously removed from the database of prosecuted criminals soon after. Here, his father's efforts also played a role, but ultimately backfired. The elderly man worked tirelessly to clear his son's name, but in the process, he suffered a heart attack and died in the hospital. Soar was overcome with shame and regret for raising a monstrous individual. A year and a half after the initial failed attempt, the 28-year-old Soar kidnapped a girl in Nagata. Despite his calm demeanor, he remained under the radar of the police, and the incident near the school in the spring of 1989 was all but forgotten. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki Sato went for a drive around the city, eventually finding himself on a deserted road in the evening. There, he came across 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who was walking home from a delayed school event. The area was isolated, with no people or cars in sight, leaving Fusako with no one to turn to for help. Sato suddenly stopped his car in front of Fusako, got out, and grabbed her while holding a knife. He threatened to slit her throat if she screamed or tried to escape. He then forced her into the trunk of his car and drove further down the road. Eventually, he stopped in a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and taped her mouth shut. Once night fell, Sato drove back to his house, taking Fusako out of the trunk and carrying her to his room, through an unfinished part of the building to avoid detection. He then left his room, re-entering through the front door as he normally would. Back upstairs, he threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be silent. He tied her to the bed, warning her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean where it would never be found. She was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's every command, still holding on to hope that he would show mercy and release her. Meanwhile, the search for the missing girl began when Fusako failed to return home from school. Her parents grew worried because they knew she had planned to stay late to watch a baseball game, but since it was already dark outside and she was long overdue, they knew something was amiss. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to locate her on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts yielded nothing. As night began to fall, they sought the police's help, hoping that swift action would lead to her prompt recovery. The police launched a search operation, which was soon bolstered by dozens of local volunteers who joined the effort by the next morning. The search for the missing girl continued the next day, with over 200 people involved. They thoroughly searched the area, posted flyers with her picture, and talked to people who might have seen something. Interestingly, Nobuyuki lived close to her school and the police station. Moreover, he had a history of attempting to kidnap her, yet he was not considered a suspect. Thanks to his father's efforts to keep his son's name out of the criminal database, the search lasted for months, covering many areas, including empty buildings, vehicles, and highways. Despite the extensive search, no leads or clues about her disappearance were found. Investigators explored various possibilities, including the unlikely suggestion that North Korean agents might have been involved in the abduction. As time passed, the search for Fusako Sano was unsuccessful, and she remained a captive of Nobuyuki's obsession. Initially, Fusako was terrified and obediently followed her captor's orders, hoping that he would eventually show mercy and release her. However, Nobuyuki had no intention of letting her go, at least not for the first few months. To maintain control, Nobuyuki bound Fusako's hands and feet extremely tightly, restricting blood flow and causing her to lose feeling in her limbs. He punished even the slightest disobedience or noise with a stun gun, beat her on the head and body, or threatened her with a knife. Despite his cruel treatment, Nobuyuki never sexually exploited Fusako during her captivity. Instead, he viewed her as a living toy or pet, someone to talk to and dominate. Nobuyuki would sit with Fusako, feeding her 1 or 2 meals a day, prepared by his mother who lived on the first floor. Due to her severely restricted diet, she became extremely weak and malnourished. The man prohibited her from leaving her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in the unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he bathed her in a basin, cutting her hair and nails himself, and dressing her in his own tattered clothes. Despite her obedient behavior, the kidnapper regularly beat her for entertainment, practicing various fighting techniques on her. After several years, Fusako's spirit was finally crushed, and she surrendered to her tormentor's demands, no longer attempting to escape or even glance out the window. Eventually, the man stopped restraining her when he left the room, leaving the door unlocked. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels, making it seem as though no one was underneath. Over time, Nobuyuki began to permit Fusako to listen to the radio and watch TV with him, but only if it was something that interested him, such as Scottish programs or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he loved. These were the only things Fusako had read during her years of confinement. For nearly a decade, a young girl was held captive in a small room, never speaking to anyone or leaving her confinement. She was mostly bedridden and had lost all will to resist, escape, or signal for help. Her captive was Nobuyuki, a violent son who lived with his mother on the first floor of the house. His mother was too afraid to enter his room, fearing physical harm if she disobeyed his rules. When Nobuyuki took she prisoner, he forbade his mother from visiting the second floor. On one occasion, even physically pushed her down the stairs when she tried to do so. In 1996, an elderly woman, Mrs. Sato, sought help from the police, alleging domestic violence by her son, who had physically abused her, forced her to follow his rules, and psychologically tormented her. However, the police were reluctant to intervene, convincing her to withdraw her statement and resolve the issue on her own. On 2 separate occasions, Mrs. Sato also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting his hospitalization in a psychiatric facility. Unfortunately, her pleas were dismissed, and she was advised to persuade her son to seek help voluntarily. 4 years later, in January 2000, after enduring yet another brutal beating, Mrs. Sato made a desperate call to the hospital, requesting a medical team and law enforcement to be sent to her home. She was being held captive by her son, who had tied her up and used a taser on her multiple times. The authorities finally responded to a pensioner's complaints and visited her home. When they arrived with an ambulance and police car, her son Nobuyuki became agitated, aggressive, and resistant. Due to his behavior, the police had to restrain him with handcuffs, and medics administered a large dose of sedatives. The elderly woman confessed that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. She revealed that she had avoided the 2nd floor of their home for years because her son had threatened to kill her if she went up there. The police decided to investigate the 2nd floor and Nobuyuki's room. Upon entering, they found a pile of blankets on the bed that seemed to move slightly. When they pulled back the blankets, they were shocked to discover a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hidden underneath. When questioned, she quietly identified herself and explained that she had been kidnapped on her way home from school a long time ago. After the shocking discovery, Nayuki's mother was questioned in the room about the captive girl, but she appeared genuinely surprised and denied any knowledge of her presence in their home, claiming she only knew about her son and herself living there. The captive corroborated this, stating she had never seen Nayuki's mother before. Nuki confessed to the police that he had been immediately attracted to Fusako when he saw her walking along the road, and he wanted to take her home with him. He claimed to have taken good care of her, providing for her needs, washing and dressing her, and reading her comic books. Although he admitted to punishing her when she disobeyed, he insisted that he treated her with affection, like a friend. Nuki believed that Fusako had feelings for him and was happy to stay with him. Nuki enjoyed talking to Fusako, discussing topics like soccer, music, and comic books, even though she didn't respond. He noted that he never locked his bedroom door, and yet Fusako never tried to escape, leading him to believe that she was content living with him. The medical examination revealed that Nuki was capable of understanding his actions despite his mental disorder, and he could face trial. His mother could be considered an accomplice because she regularly bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which might have raised suspicions. However, the fact that she consistently reached out to the police and medical institutions for help was taken into account. The case drew widespread attention before the trial began, and the local police faced severe criticism. They had previously prosecuted Nuki for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl, but they failed to prevent him from carrying out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their positions. In May 2000, Nuki was put on trial, where prosecutors examined every aspect of his actions to seek the maximum punishment. As a result, Nuki was found guilty and received a 14-year prison sentence. Nuki was released in the spring of 2015, but his mother had passed away by then, leaving him with no living relatives. Unfortunately, he was found dead in a small rented room in early 2017, and the cause of his death remains unknown. Fusako's life was devastated by the ordeal. When she was finally discovered, she was extremely weak, malnourished, and had severe muscle atrophy. She had developed a stutter, was afraid of sunlight, and had almost lost her ability to communicate. Her parents didn't even recognize their own daughter when they saw her for the first time in nearly a decade. After the ordeal, Fusako took around a year to regain her physical strength, but her mental recovery was much slower. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, became reclusive, and her cognitive development was stunted at a level comparable to a 9 to 10-year-old child. To escape the media frenzy, her parents moved her to a new town, where she adopted the alias Sachiko Yamada and refused all press interviews. Over time, Sachiko gradually built relationships, developed a passion for photography, and even managed to pass her driver's license exam. Tragically, in 2007, she experienced another devastating blow when her father accidentally drowned in front of her during a family outing to a pond. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lia Scromine. Lia Scromine was born in 1986 in Latvia, where she grew up in a close-knit family with an older brother and a younger sister. She later moved to Ireland, but remained close to her family. It was there that she met her future husband, Andrew Jordan. Despite struggling to connect with new people, the couple married 5 years later and shared big plans for their future. Lia worked at a hotel and lived modestly, but dreamed of opening a yoga retreat center in Portugal. Andrew supported her idea, and they saved money for 4 years to make it a reality. In early 2018, Lia was suffering from a severe skin condition that was affecting her physical and mental well-being. Her sister Ilse invited her on a trip to help her overcome this condition and regain her emotional balance. In February 2018, Lia and Ilse traveled to Thiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, India, where Lia could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Ayurveda, recognized by the World Health Organization since 1985 as one of the most effective alternative medicine systems, offered a promising solution for Lia's health issues. It's important to note that Ayurveda is not a cure-all, but rather a complementary approach to achieving healthy longevity. Lia, 33, and her sister Ilse traveled to Kerala seeking spiritual growth and relief from depression at an Ayurveda center. Their 6-week treatment plan included yoga, meditation, herbal remedies, and personalized nutrition and massage guidance. On March 14th, Lia skipped a yoga class, citing a headache. When Ilse returned to their room, Lia was gone. With the hotel staff's help, Ilse discovered that Lia had left the hotel at 11:30 a.m. in casual clothing, taking an auto rickshaw to Kovalam Beach for a walk. However, Lia was nowhere to be found on the beach, despite Ilse's thorough search until nightfall. Ilse reported her sister's disappearance to the police, but they showed little concern, believing Lia would either be found or return on her own the next day. Although they registered a case, the investigation was sluggish, effectively stalled from the start. Ilse took her sister Lia on a trip to India to share with her the country she loved so deeply. Tragically, the trip took a devastating turn. When the Indian police failed to take action for several days, Ilse decided to take matters into her own hands and began searching for Lia. She received support from friends and also informed her husband Andrew about Lia's disappearance, prompting him to fly to India immediately. After Lia went missing, her husband Andrew Jordan and sister Ilse launched a campaign to find her, reaching out to the local press and creating an online appeal. Ilse also tweeted to India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj, pleading for help and offering a 100,000 rupee reward to anyone with information about Lia's disappearance. Ilse and her friend Alexa, who had flown to India to help with the search, put up posters and distributed flyers in the Kovalam Beach area, where Lia was last seen. Many locals joined the search efforts. However, it's important to note that Lia struggled with depression and found it difficult to interact with strangers. On the day she vanished, she took an auto rickshaw to the beach and was never seen again. At the time, she had about 3,000 rupees with her, but no passport, which meant she couldn't leave the country. Ashok Kumar, the head of the local police station, claimed that they had no leads in Lia's disappearance. Initially, the police believed she might have gone on a drinking binge or eloped and would eventually return on her own. However, persistent requests for help from Ilse and Andrew prompted the police to launch a search operation in the Kovalam Beach area where Liga was last seen. Although a woman's body was found washed ashore in Kanyakumari district, it was not identified as Liga's. Andrew suspected that Liga had been kidnapped by local gangs to be sold, and he attempted to infiltrate these gangs to gather more information. However, he was exposed and warned that if he continued to contact the gangs, he would have to leave the country. A month after Liga's disappearance, there were still no leads to her whereabouts. Ilse continued to search for her sister, visiting Kovalam Beach daily and observing people. She developed a theory that the only way to leave the beach unnoticed was by boat. Andrew returned to India on April 17, 2018, and joined Ilse in a new effort to find Liga, but her body remained unfound. The search for Liga was made more challenging due to her being a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry maintained close contact with Liga's family and collaborated with the Indian authorities throughout the search process. The Latvian embassy also reached out to the Indian Foreign Ministry for special assistance in finding Liga. Additionally, the honorary consul of Latvia in India, whose jurisdiction includes the region where Liga went missing, was involved in the search efforts. At the request of the Coral State government, the Indian Navy and Air Force participated in the search operation. The search effort was extensive, utilizing an AN-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, Liga remained missing and the desired outcome was not achieved. By this point, everyone in the local community was aware of the missing tourist from Latvia and was supporting and sympathizing with Andrew and Ilse. On April 20, 2018, Ila received the most awaited yet devastating call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew rushed to the designated spot where the police were waiting to take them to the scene by boat. Elsa's heart was racing as she felt the overwhelming horror of the situation. As they arrived, Elsa was met with a gruesome sight. She recognized her sister's clothes, including the shirt and leggings, on the body. However, the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained a mystery how Liga had ended up in this remote location, accessible only by going through Panatur from Samudra Beach. 2 women came forward, confirming that they had seen Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But the question remained, why would a girl struggling with depression, already alone, take a boat to such a remote and inaccessible place in the forest? The body was taken to the Medical College Hospital for an autopsy, which was recorded on video. The police stated that they couldn't confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was complete. According to the city police commissioner, the body was severely mutilated, with the head found nearby. Although the police have tentatively identified the deceased as Liga, a missing tourist, they need DNA confirmation. Supporting the investigators' conclusion is the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One possible theory, according to India's rescue services, is that Liga might have been poisoned by accidentally or intentionally eating the fruit of poisonous pong trees found in the mangrove forest. Between 1989 and 1999, over 500 people died from poisoning by these fruits in Kerala alone. The idea initially seemed absurd, given the body was found hanging upside down without a head. However, if Liga had been poisoned, her body would likely have been in a different position, and her head would have been in place. Indian authorities were spouting absurdities based on misinformation about Liga's complex psychological issues. The investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had willingly abandoned her life. Ilse was concerned that the police would try to cover up her sister's murder by claiming she had voluntarily ended her life, despite the presence of a rope at the scene, which suggested the hiker had hanged herself. Elsa demanded a credible explanation for the missing head, and Ilse sarcastically retorted, Don't tell me it's just lost. Here are the forensic test results that Ilse and the public were waiting for. The evidence is overwhelming. The autopsy reveals that Lia Scromine was strangled to death by multiple people during a violent attack. There were blood pools in her brain, bruising on her neck, and external injuries on her body, likely sustained during the struggle. Although the body was decomposing, the characteristic injuries on her throat cartilage indicate that someone forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma was severe and fatal. Blood clots in her brain confirm strangulation, and bruises were found on her neck and legs, with a total of 9 wounds recorded on her body. Based on the autopsy results, the police no longer consider Lia's death to be voluntary. Instead, they believe she was murdered after putting up a struggle. Ilse, Lia's sister, felt a sense of relief that the police were now taking the case seriously and hoped they would soon find the killers. As part of their investigation, the police started questioning local drug dealers and card players. They also spoke to local residents, 2 of whom reported seeing Lia walking alone to the area where her body was later discovered. However, the police had doubts about the credibility of these eyewitnesses. Lia's family has criticized the Indian police, accusing them of incompetence. They believe that if the police had launched a search for Lia immediately, the tragedy might have been prevented. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is thought to have been kidnapped from a nearby beach, taken by boat, and then strangled. A special team of investigators has been formed to find those responsible for the crime. So far, around 40 suspects have been questioned, and arrests are expected to be made in the coming days once the authorities have gathered sufficient evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were accused of murdering Lia Scromine. According to the police, Lia Scromine was lured by the 2 men, who then subjected her to physical abuse before dismembering her body. The 2 alleged assailants, now in custody, were local dealers of illegal substances. Both suspects, who were also pimps, fully confessed to the crime while under interrogation. However, the autopsy did not provide much evidence due to the advanced state of decomposition of Lia Scromine's body. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court to review a felony murder case, suspecting that more people were involved in the woman's murder. He noted that both defendants had recanted their guilty pleas, suggesting that they may have confessed due to torture, a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband a review of the case, citing a lack of direct evidence. Andrew was outraged when the trial was postponed for 2 months. He had previously accused the authorities and police of incompetence and attempting to cover up the murder to avoid scaring off tourists. The suspect's lawyers requested and received a postponement, which they are legally entitled to do once without providing a reason. Andrew believed that the more the case was delayed, the more likely it was that the investigation was flawed. Despite his concerns, both suspects remained in custody. An investigation into Lia Scromine's murder revealed that 2 men, Umesh, 32, and Udayakumar, 28, offered her drugs, specifically Ligascani weed, and then strangled and decapitated her after she was incapacitated. The 2 suspects were arrested and found to have a history of committing similar crimes on multiple occasions. They worked for a food delivery company in Kerala's capital city and moonlighted as illegal tour guides. Umesh and Udayakumar have been charged with multiple crimes, including destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The location where Lia's body was discovered had previously been used by Umesh as a meeting spot for his male clients. He has a long history of criminal activity, with 13 cases filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have come forward to testify against him. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Lia with the 2 men in the area. Initially, they denied any involvement, but after Lia's body was found, they confessed to the murder, which was committed during an act of violence. The suspects were arrested, but initially claimed they only saw Lia in Kovalam. After repeated questioning, they eventually pleaded guilty. On December 6, 2022, the court sentenced the two men to life in prison and ordered them to pay 65,000 rupees each in compensation to Ilsa, Lia's sister. India has seen a surge in violent crimes against young girls, with a high number of sexual offenses committed against minors. In response, the government has introduced the death penalty to address the acute problem of crime in the country. The persistence of Lia's relatives, particularly her sister, and the involvement of the press and an influential MP were crucial in ensuring the case was thoroughly investigated. Initially, the local police were not taking the case seriously, suggesting that Lia may have voluntarily disappeared. This is not an isolated incident in this area, where similar cases have occurred before.